Yes, I'm all set. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, everybody, it is 1800 hours, so we will call this meeting to order. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. Instead of a roll call, I'll just acknowledge that I see Councillors Day, Jansen, Kobayashi, Parkinson, and Mayor Martin. And Councillor Baxter sends his regrets. He's dealing with a family matter tonight. Under the approval of the agenda, there's just one small addition, and that's under just after item 4, public participation, is just a 10-second mayor's message. And so with that, can I have an approval of the near-term and long-term agendas, and that the agenda of the May 4th, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted as amended? And I'll look for your virtual hands, please. And moved by Councillor Jansen. Any discussion?
By me?
Councillor Day, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank council and staff for adjusting the near-term agenda with an additional meeting as discussed the last time. So thank you very much for that.
Great, thank you for that, Cynthia. Great, with that, I will call the question.
I have my hand up too.
Oh, sorry, on the agenda,
Yeah.
Doug.
Yeah, just a quick question, and this is maybe for staff. Is it normal for us to actually have a public hearing and then have the third reading the same day? Is that normal?
So with all due respect, Doug, that has nothing to do with our agenda. Or are you speaking with the near-term agendas? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, I am, the near-term agenda.
My apologies.
Chair Logan, I can respond to that.
Okay, thank you.
It is fairly routine practice after a public hearing to go straight to third reading. And then depending on if there are any outstanding requirements with respect to agreements that need to be registered on title, statutory approvals, etc., the adoption would then come at a later date, or the bylaw, if it's not subject to any interim requirements, could go straight for third and adoption immediately after the public hearing.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. Just a couple of things. One, firstly, I do like the near-term and long-term agendas. I think they're incredibly useful. And it's a bit nitpicky, but if I could ask, maybe in the future, the color scheme could be the same between both of them. Just makes it a little easier to follow what's happening when. Not a big issue, but if the color schemes are useful. And then the only question I had is under the longer term agenda, actually item 5, establish an engagement plan to gather input regarding the concept of a passenger ferry from Royal Bay downtown. And I guess I'm a little confused why that's a Colwood specific task as opposed to perhaps a broader West Shore or a provincial one. You know, obviously the ferry service will be useful to Colwood, but it'll be used by a lot of other people. So I'm wondering why we're taking the lead on that, if that's what's happening here.
Chair Logan, may I respond?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. This item falls directly out of Council's strategic plan, and we don't necessarily indicate that we're taking the lead on the establishment of the engagement plan, but Council wanted specifically to move forward with an engagement plan regarding passenger ferry from Royal Bay to downtown. And so this particular item is straight from Council's strategic plan.
Okay, I'll move approval of the agendas then.
Okay, we've got a motion on the floor and the approval as amended. Seeing no further hands, those that are opposed, please raise your virtual hand. I don't see anybody opposed, so the motion passes. There are a set of minutes from April the 14th, a special committee of the whole. I'm looking for a motion to adopt as presented. Moved by Councillor Day. Any discussion? Seeing none, those that are opposed? Seeing none, the minutes are adopted. Motion passes. Thank you. We have another set of minutes from April the 20th, Committee of the Whole. Looking for a motion to adopt. Moved by Councillor Day. Any discussion? Seeing none, those that are opposed? Seeing no opposed, the motion passes. We don't have any public participation or anybody registered to speak tonight. However, we did receive one written submission from the Royal Bay Homeowners Association today, and which has been attached to the agenda. With that, I will now move to the brief mayor's message. Mayor Martin.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the public aware of one thing. Seacliff Properties has made the decision to suspend its application for the rezoning of Royal Beach. This suspension, the city cannot comment on why they have asked for that suspension. That will be up to the applicant to message to the public why. And that's the mayor's message for tonight.
Great. Thank you very much. We will now move to new business under 5.1 Urban Forest Bylaw Update. So I'll invite Richard Buchan, our planning technician, to introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How's my volume?
Good.
Great. If committee recalls, earlier this year, staff highlighted issues associated with the city's urban forest bylaw, specifically with respect to city resources required to track replacement trees and ensure that they are planted. Council directed staff to come back with options, and the attached report details several options for the committee's consideration. At the request of council, staff can bring forth additional options if desires. An option which eliminates the need for staff to track replacement trees entirely is detailed in section 4.1 of the report and forms part of the staff recommendation. I'm here for questions if you have them.
Thank you, Richard. I see Councillor Day. Cynthia.
Thank you. So I'd like to start tonight off by making a motion that option B be endorsed, 4.2 on page 36 of 243 of our agenda, to authorize amendments to the bylaw to require security deposits. And if that is successful, then I would offer some motivation for that reasoning.
Thank you, Councillor Day. So we do have a motion on the floor. Sorry, I'm just looking for it. Was it in the report? Sorry, Cynthia?
Yes, it's on page 36 and it's option B, noted as 4.2 in the report, and it's to authorize amendments to the bylaw to require security deposits.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And as the mover of the motion, motivate us.
All right. So option 4.2 would reduce the need for staff resources to track tree replacements and would maintain the city's urban forest on both public and private lands, and it would support birds and animals throughout Colwood. Tree species chosen by residents who may be in the best position to support the planting and watering with knowledge of the area's limitations and benefits would be more likely to go out of their way to look after a tree of their own choosing. So if council would like to incentivize native species rather than mandating those species for residents, where many are actually slow growing or a little bit challenging to propagate, we could plant native species on the city lands where residents are not able or not interested in planting on their own property. And that's
Great.
what I got.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Cynthia. I concur. I think it's important that this bylaw reflects both public and privately held lands. And unfortunately, I think just taking in money to put into a fund to plant on boulevards really only addresses part of the intention of what this bylaw is trying to achieve. And I have some concerns. And I do think that our community's told us many times that they appreciate our greenery. And I think we should be doing everything we can to support that, both private and public setting. And I do support the part I like about the putting forward the security deposit option is that if a person chooses not to take any action or doesn't follow through, then that money will revert to the community, and then we can take our own action by planting on public space. So I think it offers a variety of options. I do have some questions for staff, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if this is the time or you want me to continue.
Certainly. Yep.
I have some concerns about the cost, and I see that we charge currently $250 for an application to take a tree down. My question is, does that include a replacement tree, or is the homeowner or the builder on the hook for the tree as well?
Richard?
Through the chair, our application fees are $75 for the application and $25 per each tree in excess of one. The cash in lieu, which is either the security or the providing cash in lieu of a replacement tree, is the $250. That represents sort of half the cost of the city planting a tree elsewhere, and it would be up to the applicant, whether it's a builder, homeowner, etc.
Okay, thanks for the clarity. I would like to see this, achieve some cost neutrality too, so that the rest of the community isn't supporting an individual property owner. And I do notice that there are some discrepancies in sort of the recovery and the administration behind it. So that's more amusing than a question. I apologize, but I would love to hear feedback on that when this comes back. Also, I think that one of the questions I also have is this is a question, Mr. Chair, sorry, but what does constitute a tree? And I mean, I couldn't find it in there, and I'm sure it's in the bylaw somewhere, but I have heard tales where someone took down say a shrub of significant circumference, and it was deemed a tree, and they would charge an exorbitant amount of money. I mean, do we clearly define what the difference between a shrub or some kind of planting versus a tree?
Richard?
Through the chair, our bylaw protects trees of specific species and at specific sizes. It does have a caveat that anything of 60 centimeters or more in diameter would be considered protected. I can go grab the specifics in terms of heights, because I believe there's a height requirement too, something around 1.5 meters, but I can grab that in just a couple of minutes here.
No, that's not required. That's great, thanks. So in other words, me digging up a rose bush isn't going to necessitate some kind of application.
It would have to be a really large rose bush, so probably not.
The only thing you'd be applying is some ointment and a Band-Aid.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Cynthia, for the motion, and I do endorse that.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. I got to admit, I went a little cross-eyed reading this, trying to just understand what it is. And I'm concerned about the motion on the table, in that my understanding is it's going to continue the practice of city staff having to go out to somebody's property to see if they planted a tree, to see if it's flourishing, and to see if it's in the right spot. And I would really like to see us not spend a lot of time and effort on that. But is that, can somebody clarify that? Is that what we're talking about here?
Richard?
Yes, the option as proposed by Councillor Day would mean that staff would be following up to make sure replacement trees are planted, but we would have security. So if a homeowner doesn't contact us to let us know, we could potentially look at keeping that security to plant in other places. It gets a bit of a stick or a carrot, so that there's an incentive for the homeowner to follow up, as opposed to us having to track down people who don't follow up.
So if we went with option 4.1, what we'd be saying is, just give us $250 or maybe $500 if you're taking down a tree, and we'll take care of planting it on public land somewhere. Is that a correct interpretation?
Through the chair, yes, that would be the correct interpretation. There's a slight exception for areas that are of environmental significance, such as by creek sides, where those would be subject to a development permit. But throughout most of Colwood, it would be yes, it would be going into parks or boulevards.
Okay, so I guess my thinking is that, you know, our staff has got lots of good things to do, and running around enforcing tree plantings and the like is probably not high on their desire list. And I also think that most of the trees that get planted in any municipality are done voluntarily because people want to put a tree in their backyard and want to do that. So if we don't enforce people planting trees, doesn't mean we're going to denude all the private property in Colwood. It just means that some people will plant their own and some won't. So I guess I'm going to be against this motion, and if it fails, I might come back with 4.1. But if I did, I would want the ability, in cases where it was sufficient, if there was a developer who said, you know, I've got an area over here that doesn't look great now, and I'd be happy to plant 20 trees in it, I'd be happy to pay him to plant the trees there if they, you know, we had some understanding they were going to last. I just, the one tree at a time on private lots, enforcement of that just doesn't appeal to me.
Thank you. First time speaker, Mayor Martin.
Sorry, thank you. Before I ask my question, can I just get a clarification from staff through the chair regarding Councillor Parkinson's question right now in regards to would staff actually be going out to every single property?
Through the chair, the way the bylaw is established is that staff do have to follow up to make sure that the tree survives. And then if Councillor Day's recommendation was to go forward, assuming it survived, we would then return the security deposit.
Okay, thank you. I just saw some head shaking that wasn't true. So I just wanted to clarify that. Can you please, going to 7, financial considerations, second paragraph. If council directs staff to make amendments to require that all replacement trees are provided in the form of cash in lieu of the rate of $250 each, the city will continue to subsidize the processing of applications. However, the cost and staff resources associated with tracking replacement trees will be entirely eliminated. So I want to focus on that for a second in regards to this specific motion. This specific motion, are we subsidizing the processing of applications? The city, when I say we.
Richard?
Through the chair, both options do not receive 100% cost recovery, so there's a subsidization for both options.
And why is that? Why are we not cost neutral?
The application fees as established were done through consultation with the city's urban forest task force. And I believe it came from a position of wanting to have fees be somewhat feasible for, more palatable for homeowners.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to the workload for staff, because my reading of the report led me to understand that with this option of requiring security deposits, the onus would be on the resident to contact the city and say, yes, I'd like my deposit back. Here's an email photograph of the tree that has survived. So I wasn't under the impression that this would require staff to be doing a lot of legwork to follow up. This was a matter of, they have to give us the money, and if they want the money back, then they need to tell us that the tree has survived, and then we would release some money to them. So I don't think this has to be quite as onerous as it sounds like it might be currently. I think this is an improvement that's along the lines of what other municipalities in the region are doing to promote the retention of trees. So I
Richard?
guess I'm looking for staff to tell me if I misunderstood.
Just to make sure I understand the question, it's do staff have to go and follow up to make sure the tree survived after we receive the confirmation from homeowners?
Correct.
council could direct us not to, but we wouldn't have a way of verifying that the photograph is recent or current. Our typical practice for any landscape bond is to go out and take photos on site after we've been prompted by the developer or the homeowner to go out because it's been done.
Okay,
Councillor Jansen? And if we look into-
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I mean, I do think there's lots of options here along the way with a homeowner who's compliant as far as photos, email confirmation, what have you. But the other piece to this is it's a tree. It's going to be around for 100 years. So conceivably, we got 100 years to add it to a list to go around and check if it's alive. I mean, I remember seeing the list of applications for the past 12 months or so, and it didn't seem over the top to me. So I don't think there's 1,000 applications in a year. I am quite sure that this can be added to someone's task list for a day when it's not that onerous or busy, or maybe it's raining and they can't mow. I have no idea, but I think it's within our capacity. And you know, an old phrase comes to mind, and that is we trust, but we also verify. And maybe it's a system where there's a random audit as opposed to every single one, maybe every third one or something like that, just to make sure that we're achieving a level of compliance consistent with the bylaw.
Thank you. Not seeing any more hands, I will call the question. And just to be clear, it's on 4.2 of the report, option B. So with that, those that are opposed to the motion on the floor, I'll ask you to raise your virtual hand, please. I'm waiting for Councillor Parkinson. There we go. I just see one opposed, and that would be Councillor Parkinson. So the motion passes. Thank you. All right. We'll go to 5.2, the Colwood Business License Bylaw update. And Richard, you're on the hot seat again. Richard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I think I muted myself there. If the committee recalls, staff brought forward a report to both committee and council last year seeking direction for potential changes to the city's business license bylaw, including things such as fees, dealing with ride hailing, etc. Staff have been working on the bylaw revisions as directed, and this report details and includes the amended bylaws for council's consideration. Section 3.1 specifically identifies the motions and appendices that address them, and I'm also here for questions if you have them.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. Councillor Jansen.
I'm happy to move the staff recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. On the motion, Councillor Day.
thank you. I'm just wondering, are there any regulations that we could enact to support accessible ride services? So taxi companies who have applied to the province for a license, for which we have been consulted in the past, have all had a letter that included a request that they provide accessible services. However, few accessible services have resulted. Is there anything more that we can do to promote accessible ride services in Colwood?
Richard?
Through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Day. Staff would have to look into some options to deal with this. The issue comes down to that this is the responsibility of the Passenger Transportation Board in the province. Our ability to require accessible cabs is really limited.
Great, thank you. I would really appreciate if when this comes back, there could be some consideration given to even in, whether it's lobbying through UBCM to get the passenger license board to follow up with people, because I have anecdotally heard of several companies who are basically parking their accessible vehicle and mostly using other vehicles. And we have had significant experiences. A member of the disability committee was not able to get a ride home after a meeting because of a lack of accessible taxis in the West Shore. The only place that had one was Souk. So it is a big issue for our residents, and I think we need to be proactive. So I'd appreciate any thoughts that staff could bring forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. Can somebody explain inter-community business licenses versus intermunicipal business license to me? I tried to follow that, and I must admit, I was confused.
Richard?
Through the chair, intermunicipal licenses are licenses that are accepted throughout the CRD. All 13 municipalities participate in the program. The intercommunity licensing program is one that has been introduced by the province that would apply to all Vancouver Island municipalities. Currently, they haven't all been adopted. So right now, theoretically, as more communities start to adopt the intercommunity licensing, we could opt out of the intermunicipal once all the municipalities are a part of that, should that occur.
Did everybody just lose him?
No, one's provincially driven, the other is municipally driven.
And to clarify, the one that's provincially driven accounts for all of Vancouver Island municipalities, whereas the one that's local is just the 13 CRD municipalities.
So is there really a need for two of them?
Currently, yes, because the one that is available to all Vancouver Island communities isn't adopted by all 13 CRD municipalities. But once, and assuming it does get adopted by all CRD municipalities, then we can opt out of the intercommunity licensing program.
Okay.
Sorry, intermunicipal licensing program.
Yes.
Thank you for making that crystal clear.
Yep.
Sorry
Good
for my confusion. And then I just did have one question on page 3. You talk about the ride-hailing companies without downloading enforcement and regulation costs to the city, which I guess we're all for, as long as enforcement and regulation is happening. And do we get any say on that, or is it if somebody downtown says this is the rules, we just have to live with them?
Through the chair, in terms of enforcement options, the province deals with those who are not compliant with having a provincial license. If we have issues with ride-hailing companies in our streets, we would potentially be able to update our traffic and highway regulations in the future to deal with them.
Thank you.
All right, not seeing any more virtual hands, so I will call the question. Those that are opposed to the motion on the floor, please raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, the motion passes. All right, we will move on to item 5.3, 1913 Jerome Road from Ani, a license of occupation agreement. And I'll invite Brent Molnar, our Director of Engineering and Development Services, to introduce the item. Brent.
Thank you very much, Councillor Logan. Just give me a moment to share my screen so I can run through the PowerPoint with you. Have you got the PowerPoint up on your screens?
We do.
Yep.
Excellent. Excellent. Now let's just see if I can get it running. Sorry, just give me one sec. From beginning. Okay, so we are talking, sorry, that's an abrupt start. Sorry. So we are talking about a license of occupation for the Colba Corners Ani development. I've just got a couple of slides to walk us through, and I'm available to answer any questions that you may have afterwards. So the recommendation is that the report entitled Ani License of Occupation Agreement firstly be received, and that it be recommended to council that a license of occupation agreement be approved for the owners of the Ani development for a backflow preventer and manhole located within the City Boulevard for buildings 1, 9, and 10, which would include a Section 219 covenant that is reviewed and authorized by the city signatories, and that a license of occupation and Section 219 covenant be approved and prepared for the authorization by the city signatories for a storm drain and manhole crossing at Belmont Road associated with the future phases of the Ani development. So there are two different areas or multiple different areas for two specific reasons. One's are for the backflow preventers and one is for works on Belmont Road. So the screenshot that you see here shows you the locations where the backflow preventers are going or are proposed to go in relation to the site. When we first started working with the building shell on building 1, we first started noticing that there was little bit of issues with space. And the backflow preventers are intended to be private, but there just wasn't room within the city space wholly located within the land. And so there's a partial encroachment for both building 1, 9, and in front of building 10 that you can see in the location shown for the backflow preventer. Up at the north portion of your image and tied to the uppermost image for Belmont, you see a storm drain and manhole in the road right of way as well as proposed. So there's two different considerations here. Backflow preventers are a CRD system. The storm drain is because essentially the water flows downhill from the Ani lands. They do own the lands on the north side of Belmont Road. And there's an existing storm system there with a little bit of ponding that nearly forms the headwaters for a creek system called Joe's Creek that was truncated in the past by the Galloping Goose down below. However, the storm drainage does flow from these upper lands across Belmont Road and to the system that's located on the low side or the north side of Belmont Road. So both pieces of land are owned by Ani, and Ani would like to deal with some of their storm drainage from the site that's under development on the land north of Belmont Road. And hence they've requested our consideration for a storm drain which crosses Belmont Road, which would be theirs. So the proposal will enable the infrastructure to be located in the city's right of way, requires the owner to maintain and be responsible for the works for the life of the buildings and infrastructure. And that's the reason for the Section 219 is that regardless of the ownership that responsibility and obligation carries forward. The recommendation is the license of occupation be extended from a 25-year term to a 75-year term for the life of the building, whichever is greater, because we can't see this need for the license, especially for the backflow preventer, to have a fixed term. It'll run the full span of the built form. And that we recommend as well that the Section 219 covenant be registered in regards to the license of occupation on title to ensure that the agreement transfers to the future property owners. The options are that council could deny the approval of the license of occupation agreement, in which case CRD, for example, wouldn't have room for the backflow preventers, which are a necessity, which means that we might have a compromise to the water systems, or that we would be truncating some of the storm drainage, which typically flows across that land. Option 2, the council approve the license of occupation agreements, in which case we would go forward, granting Ani the right to own that infrastructure on the road in and around our road existing around it. And item 3, council could approve the license of occupation agreement for the backflow preventers for buildings 1, 9, and 10, and defer the approval of the license of occupation agreement for the storm drain for more information. So item 3 is to identify the fact that they can be considered as the CRD license of occupation or necessity for CRD and that of the storm drain, both or one or the other. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Brent. Councillor Parkinson.
I'll move the recommendations.
Okie dokie, thank you very much. On the motion, Councillor Kobayashi.
Oh, sorry, I was going to move the motion. I'll just put my hand down.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I have just one question, and I did ask it by email earlier. I would assume that there's no payment for the license of occupation.
Just unmuting. Council always has the option of making a payment a condition of the license agreement. That hasn't been brought forward as an option because it's unusual and particular. However, council does have the option. It is agreement that we are entering into with a private property owner, and there is the ability to apply a term and charge.
So my reason for asking that was I did ask about you know, if we need to make changes in the future, what would happen? And I received the response that if the license was negatively affected by a change that we wish to make in our roadway, that we would need to renegotiate it. Then, and that it would not really be a trump card for the licensed holder. So I'm just wondering, if there is an unintended consequence of a disincentive to us to make whatever needed improvement in the roadway might come along in the future because of the need to renegotiate that agreement in order to make the change.
So great question. And I even sent some of my wording almost coming back at that, which is fantastic. So in specific regard, actually in regards to all of them, it is an impediment in a road right of way, and one that the city and staff will work to avoid any necessary implications in the future. However, the agreement and the section 219 would address openly the need to bring forward an amendment, and if there was an amendment, that neither party would unreasonably withhold their either consideration or their factors that they'd like to bring forward as a result of it. So that's typical in an agreement that you'd place in their terms that would speak to if the city needed to amend this agreement in the future, the other party shall not unreasonably withhold their agreement. And then you'd come down to a negotiated statement with the developer or the holder of that license of occupation. So in these specific cases, I would say that the developer would likely, or the Ani Lands owner would likely say, sure, just don't impede my ability to drain across that area to the lowland, which I think provides an environmental benefit for the headland for Joe's Creek. Although truncated, it does provide storage to those pond and wetlands. And in regards to CRD, the only likely impediment in the future would be if the city needed to dig, widen, plant a tree, that sort of thing. There wouldn't be an impediment to sidewalk widening, boulevard creation. It would just be something that we wanted to put in that exact spot. And typically in regards to boulevard improvements, and even streetlights, there's a little bit of wiggle room in the design that they could be shifted around to avoid those impediments as best as possible. I don't foresee that much complication with it, but I do intend to include in the covenant and the agreement the intention to peaceably work together to resolve any differences in the future.
Great. And one of the options included getting more information about the storm drainage issues. So I'm just wondering if when this comes back, you don't need to provide more information tonight, but I would just like to have more information on whether we're recreating natural water processes or if we're creating, another pipe buried in the ground situation. Because of course my preference would be to have as much natural ecosystem recreation as possible.
So if time allows, I can answer that promptly right now. Joe's Creek, which is the creek system that you've heard me refer to, was truncated long ago with the Galloping Goose and the ENN rail system. That created a pocket of storage of water on the high side of it, which is on these private lands, as well as created that minor storm pond that actually is located just along Ocean Boulevard below the park and ride, if you can visualize it. It's
Sure.
It's that same creek system that was truncated by the Galloping Goose, which was, X years ago. So this, although there are culverts that join it, they're informal and they're established under the right of way. So the true head of Joe's Creek is that wetland at the bottom of the park and ride. This allows for that natural flow of drainage to keep going in that direction. And I do believe that Joe's Creek benefits from either overt surface flow or subsurface flow that's happening in and around the ballast of the rail system.
Great. So would that wetland be protected?
That's one of the things that we've spoken to Ani about. So when we come back to council with more information. At present, that portion of their storm system has fit into their stormwater master plan to connect the highlands with that piece of property. What we're lacking is the depth of that culvert and the specificity of the install to ensure that our sanitary goals can be worked around it. So knowing that we do intend to have sanitary systems down Belmont, we also intend to allow water, the ability to upgrade as necessary. That's the design component that we're missing. So it's not an environmental design component. It is the specificity of depth of install that we're coming back to. Did I answer your full question, Cynthia, or Councillor Day?
Well, I'm just wondering if the wetland area as we know it
Oh, that's-
today is protected.
So it is not presently covered in a development permit area. But when we started communication with ONI about it, I identified to them that by reinforcing that water flow, we would look to have a pond or storm system part of their development. And they agreed. They haven't yet moved that design for that building along yet, but they do know of the intention to store not only the water that's presently there, but also intends to be introduced from this water flow, and are trying to incorporate a surface feature into that design. But again, that design is not fully hammered out yet, but it has been discussed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Martin, then I'll call the question.
Thank you. I got I'm supportive of this, and I have just really two quick questions. The first is on page 1 of the report. The LOO agreement would enable the private infrastructure to be located within the city's right of way and require that the owners continue to maintain and be responsible for the encroachment for the life of the building or infrastructure. Can I just please get confirmation from staff that to maintain and be responsible for the encroachment also means that they are liable, that any liability that gets created is on them, not the city?
Brent?
The road, it is a license of occupation within the city's road infrastructure. So ultimately, the safety of that road always befalls the responsibility of the city. If there was a collapse of the storm system, then it would likely be noted first by city staff, and then we would actively work with the developer to bring about that repair. But Mayor Martin, I think you're asking a little bit thicker question than that, which is, okay, so on the road, where does the liability lie? And it remains with the city because it's a license for them to occupy a portion of the road.
Okay, which brings me to, thank you, which brings me to my second question, which is under the financial consideration. There are no immediate costs to the city of Colwood, as a cost would be borne by the property owners of the ONI development. Can you describe what the city's liabilities and costs would be through the life of a 75-year LOO agreement?
So initially the costs are considered the cost to register at land titles and deal with the lawyer in terms of the registration, the creation of that document. In terms of the life of the system, we are already maintaining the surface. We are already maintaining the shoulders. The inlet and the outlet of this drain system specific to the Belmont Road drain would be wholly that, because it starts on private property and would end on private property. So there's virtually no liability, aside from the fact that if there was a sinkhole that's created by it, for example, that we were all unaware of and somebody happened to fall into it, it would fall to the city on the maintenance of the road in all likelihood. We would then cause an effect with the other people's.
Okay, Councillor Parkinson?
Just following up on the mayor's comments there, and just a concern. Obviously, the backflow preventers on city property would require a lot of maintenance, at least annual, I think, and the consequences of not maintaining them could be reasonably severe. I just want to make sure that the city is protected from that. There are agencies that enforce backflow prevention, maintenance, and would stay on top of it, so that when you talk about the city being responsible for the road surface, I can understand that, but we don't want to get dragged into any issues related to improper maintenance of a backflow preventer.
You're completely right, and thanks for bringing that separation to it, Councillor Parkinson. What we've been talking about the drain system is one thing, but the backflow preventers are a system that CRD requires and the building code requires in order to protect the water infrastructure on the lands. There is another agreement between CRD and the developer in terms of the long-term maintenance of those systems, which wholly places the responsibility for those backflow preventers onto the developer. The relationship and how we then interact with it is simply to allow the developer to occupy that portion of our lands. However, the CRD obligation requires that maintenance as per their requirements to ensure water integrity.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I'll call the question. Those that are opposed to the motion on the floor, which is the staff recommendation. I'm not seeing anyone, so the motion passes. All right. Next item is item 5.4, rezoning unit 202 310 Whale Road, site-specific text amendment to allow retail cannabis in the land use bylaw. So right now I'll invite Jill Collinson, our senior planner, to introduce the item and provide a presentation. Jill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just share my screen here and set this presentation up. Okay, so before us tonight is Colwood's first application for consideration of the retail sale of cannabis. So the site is located near the corner of Whale Road and the Island Highway, and it's unit 202 at 310 Whale Road. It's within the Colwood Corners OCP land use designation where retail uses are encouraged and supported. The rezoning request to amend the land use bylaw to permit retail sales for cannabis within one individual retail unit, and the property is currently zoned CS1. To facilitate the retail cannabis use to occur, there's also corresponding amendments to the general regulations and definitions section of the land use bylaw. So just a bit of background. In 2016, the land use bylaw was amended to prohibit any type of cannabis sale or use other than within a licensed pharmacy. In 2018, the federal government passed the Cannabis Act, which legalized possession and sale of non-medical cannabis. Correspondingly, the province then passed the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act, establishing cannabis retail licensing regime similar to what we have for liquor. And the Liquor Control and Regulation, the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch is responsible for licensing non-medical cannabis private stores and monitoring the cannabis retail sector. So as mentioned, this rezoning application is specific to this one strata lot. The proposed amendment limits it to the square footage of the strata lot. You may recall last fall, Council adopted a cannabis retail store policy, which established guidelines for when considering applications such as this. It's offered in Appendix 1 of the agenda. The policy states that the retail sale of cannabis can only be considered in established retail locations where the current zoning permits retail stores and on properties within specified land use designations, including Colwood Corners. The cannabis retail store policy also requires analysis of separation distances between adjacencies of schools, other retail cannabis stores, and city-owned parks or playground facilities. These are summarized in Table 1, which is on page 127 of the agenda, and a map option is included as Appendix 2. So to summarize, Brooks West Shore is the closest school at approximately 730 meters away. The nearest cannabis retail store is Clarity Cannabis, which is actually in Langford, approximately 2 kilometers away. And as for city parks or playground facilities, there's West Shore Parks and Recreation across the highway, approximately 107 meters away. And then Millstream Creek Park, which is about 270 meters away, but accesses via the Galloping Goose. The policy also requires that the applicant hold a public meeting prior to application proceeding towards you guys tonight. This occurred on February 25th at West Shore Parks and Rec. The summary of public input is also included within tonight's report as Appendix 3, and the applicant is here tonight to offer further information. So as mentioned, this is the first retail cannabis application to be in front of the committee, and it does comply with land uses outlined within the retail store policy. The city has not yet received confirmation from the BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch that an application for non-medical cannabis retail has been made. However, the applicant has indicated they will be applying for this following first and second reading of the bylaw. So in summary, this is a rezoning application proposing to make text changes within the land use bylaw, including new definitions of cannabis and retail cannabis, update general regulations to reflect current legislation and permit retail cannabis as a use, as well as to site specifically enable the use at unit 202 310 Whale Road. Also zooming tonight is Phil Flocald on behalf of Coast Canada Corporation. He's prepared a presentation for this evening and I will pass it over to him.
Thank you, Jill. Phil, over to you.
Just unmuted there. All right, great. Thanks, Jill. I appreciate that segue and certainly appreciate your time this evening, Mr. Chair, and to the rest of the committee. I've got a short presentation that'll give you a bit of an indication and an introduction to Corsicana. Since the onset of our project, we found that partnership is really key in everything we've done. So you're going to hear that term quite frequently tonight. And the basis of our entire business is a grounded partnership with the Cowichan Tribes, the largest Indigenous band in British Columbia. They are the majority owner of our limited liability partnership. And part of the reasoning for that is myself and my other managing partner, Carney Dillon, are born and raised here in the Cowichan Valley, and we have direct ties to Chief and the council members at the Cowichan Tribes. And we found that they're really fighting an uphill battle in a lot of different segments within the community, within education, jobs, etc. So a large portion of our initiative is to provide some conduit for growth and do it by a means of health and wellness. We don't look upon ourselves as a pot shop or a pot company. We've approached this business solely focused on health and wellness and knowledge transfer and sharing. And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight through some of the further partnerships that we've been able to establish. Our success, primarily here in the Cowichan Valley, has really been through community engagement and being fully transparent, not only in the communities we operate in, but both with the provincial government and the federal government as well. Those government-to-government initiatives are key for us to allow, the execution of our overall business plan, which branches outside of retail, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Our positioning with the government has been based on the fact that we've never been involved in the gray market of cannabis. Myself, I come from an engineering background within the oil and gas industry. I've lived abroad. I've operated Fortune 500 companies overseas. My managing partner, Mr. Dillon, has been an IT professional for the better part of about 18 years. So this is a bit of a new venture for us as well, but we certainly see the possibilities and the positive positioning that can happen with the right approach to this industry. We've been able to, through our first flagship store here in the Cowichan Valley in Duncan, we've been able to incorporate as many as 10 jobs within that first store. We're looking to double that number at our second store in North Cowichan Valley, and with other expansion opportunities within the Victoria area as well. So the job creation that we are offering to community members is fairly significant. We pay living wages to our employees, which again allows them to support their families through these initiatives as well. As I mentioned, we are fully provincially licensed. And what that means is we're able to move through the licensing process much quicker now. We've navigated our financial integrity background checks. We've navigated our security background checks. So we're fully vetted by the province and in very good standing. So what that means is for any of these additional locations that we pursue, we're able to gain what's called an AIP, or an approval in principle. That approval in principle is something that we would look to get in the very near term following this meeting and a positive outcome. And again, that is simply because the province knows us, they've vetted us, they understand our operation, our security measures, implementation, standard operating procedures, and we're again in very good standing with the province. So those AIPs and that application for new stores can happen in a matter of 1 or 2 weeks. It can go very quickly for us because of our good standing. The snapshot you see here is a bit of a rendering of our flagship store here in Duncan.
Sorry, we can't see that, Phil.
Oh, you can't see it?
No, not if you're presenting it online.
Are you able to see it now?
Ah, it's just loading. Perfect. Yep, there we go.
All right, sorry about that, everyone. If you can see it now, you'll see a bit of a snapshot of our store here in the Cowichan Valley. And as you can see, it's a little bit more reminiscent of an inviting, warm atmosphere. We've styled it around a boutique feeling. Everything that we have within our store is based on knowledge transfer, teaching, and helping our clients navigate the many products that are available today in the industry. I think it is important to note that all products that we offer in our store come directly from the LDB as the provincial distributor of the wholesale market. But in lieu of that, it's a bit of a paradox that people think recreational marijuana is a deferral from medical. It's actually all exactly the same. Manufacturing of marijuana is done at a certain level under the federal regulation that deems it medical. So all products that we do sell in our store are of a medical grade, and we certainly approach it with that belief that we are selling healing products and products that allow people to live a more fulfilled life in certain applications. The demographic that we've been able to see in our store is more on the range of 45 and over. These individuals are visiting our store for, looking to enhance certain areas of their life, looking to mitigate some pain, help with their appetite. We have several clients that are daily users. These folks have anything from cancer to MS to arthritis, debilitating diseases that affect them every day. So we're very happy to provide this service to our community and to the folks that need it. I would also like to say that with this atmosphere and with the products that we offer, we're not seeing a huge influx, an influx of at all of less desirables, if I can put it that way. The price point of these products that we offer is nowhere near what we understand a gray market offering is. So we are very happy with the clientele that we're able to support on a daily basis. And again, speaking from experience, we have seen no crime. We've had no incidents within the store, nothing to do with any theft or vandalism or anything along those lines. So I think that's an important note. This is a bit of a snapshot of the space in the vacant 7-Eleven building in Colwood. One of the things that we have to do as part of our AIP and overall provincial application is provide full security mandates and offer that as a 24-hour closed caption recording. So everything we do is monitored off-site 24 hours a day. All of our product is stored within the secure storage area. Those areas where the storage of that controlled substance is FOB activated. So we have the ability to only allow key holders or supervisors within our organization access to those areas. Everything is under lock and key within the sales area or the point of sales terminal. Again, promoting further security. We also have panic buttons implemented in both our entry vestibule and at the point of sale, so that if there is an incident, we have a direct link to the RCMP who show up in a matter of minutes. And fortunately or unfortunately, we learned that through the development of our first store when one of our tradesmen hit the panic button and the RCMP were there in about a minute and a half. So we know it works, and it's definitely effective. So the security implementations are that of any secured cannabis facility, and we absolutely abide by the letter of the law and the regulations when it comes to our standard operating procedure and our training to each and every one of our employees through a very intense orientation, if you will. So to talk a little bit further about our partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, we view ourselves a little bit different than the standard run-of-the-mill cannabis store. And again, reverting back to the partnerships, our business model has always been one of diversity and providing further benefit to community members, both Indigenous and not. Part of those initiatives have been directly related to our ongoing relationship with UBC, primarily the plant sciences and food sciences divisions. We're currently developing studies and involved in studies around product development and really driving the science behind these products so we can learn a lot more about how we can develop products specifically for ailments that people deal with on a daily basis rather than just sell pot. We're also very active in developing a full curriculum with the university for both cultivation and processing. That is ongoing and being reviewed by multi-faculty deans at the moment. And we trust that that will be implemented over the next 12 to 24 months. As I mentioned as well earlier, we have a very good ongoing relationship with the province. They're very in tune to our business and our business model, and ultimately are in full support of the initiatives that we begin to establish within First Nations communities, not just our own. For example, we're working with Chief Gordon Planis out in Souk, trying to help him and his community navigate some of the challenges within the industry and the regulatory environment and framework, which can be quite daunting. So we're absolutely helping these communities along and helping them navigate some of the challenges and pitfalls that can come up. As you can imagine, this is a somewhat capitally intense business. You know, we sunk a few $100,000 into our first store with all the implementations and the handcrafted woodwork that we've got there. So we want to make sure that any of these other communities that we're working with are able to ensure that investment and get a return on that investment in due course. And then just further to our focus as a company, as I mentioned, we're very diverse and planning many different attributes of our overall business model, which include retail, the production and a study of hemp. I mentioned that we are in a study with UBC right now. We're actually conducting a study based on specific fibers within the hemp plant that we're looking to develop into food packaging to reduce food waste. It actually extends the shelf life of meat and dairy products, which we're very, very happy about. That study is ongoing and will last at least another 12 to 24 months. But again, we're driving our capital back into important initiatives within our community that we feel are going to make a big difference. Some of the other things that we're very passionate about are obviously providing benefit to the First Nations, as we said. We've actually reached out to the territory landholders within the areas that we intend to operate to make sure that we have those blessings and approvals to extend our footprint as a retail offering. And I can assure you that those communications have been warmly received. And we continue to be a transparent business and ultimately are here to answer any questions tonight that Chair and Council may have. And that's a wrap on Coastal Canada.
Thank you, Phil. I will open it up. I see Councillor Jansen. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the applicant. That's a tight presentation. I enjoyed reading it, all the materials in advance. I am heartened by the fact that this is a current operator in this sector. So this isn't a first-time applicant. And I do appreciate the work that's gone into opening up the previous stores that our community will enjoy that experience. I take it this is the old 7-Eleven store. A couple of questions for Jill. The old 7-Eleven store, I take it it's just the upstairs portion. I couldn't quite tell if it was one floor or both floors, or is that a different unit below there, I think.
Jill?
Through the chair, yes, Stratolot 10 is specific to the main level there.
And I see, did I hear right and read right that this is site-specific zoning, so like a spot zone for that particular store, is that right?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. The council policy for cannabis retail requires every single retailer coming into Colwood to zone site specifically for that one site. So in this situation, it's unique to Stratolot 10, which is at 202 310 Whale Road and no other.
Okay, great, thanks. And I do think the location is appropriate. I think that it was only a matter of time for us to have an outlet like this in our community. And I do believe that it's a decent location for it. I think that's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jansen. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. So my understanding is that this is an application to rezone Stratolot 10. I think in the past we've said that we'll need approval of Strata Corporation as well as the other approvals, and hopefully that can come forward. But my main question is, if I look at the internal layout, it looks like you're only using half of Stratolot 10, and the other 10 looks like it's vacant. And yet, if we were to approve this zoning the way it's put forward to, that would actually be zoned for marijuana sales, cannabis sales, I guess. So what would be to prevent somebody coming along who did maybe want to appeal to a different demographic than you do to rent out the other half, and then we'd have 2 cannabis stores.
Jill?
Through the chair. So the first portion of the question was related to receiving strata approval, and that was received, and the application prior to moving forward, that was a requirement, so no concerns there. The other, as to only using half of the strata lot, I will pass that along to the applicant, Phil.
Phil, briefly?
Yes, through the chair. Thank you, Jill. Just to touch on that briefly, the space right now does have a very large set of coolers that were left by the previous tenant. We are still working with the landlord to determine if those units are to stay or leave. If they are to stay, we would likely incorporate those into our design. But at the moment, it is about a 3,000 square foot space, which doesn't really fit our business model. We typically like spaces around the range of 1,500 to 1,700 square feet. But if it is a point of contention, we're more than happy to redesign the space and commit to the entire 3,000. At this point, we have not confirmed with the landlord whether we are to take the entire 3,000 square feet or break it up into a demise space.
I guess, my intent is not to force you to rent more space than you need or do anything like that. I would hope that our staff could come up with a way to make sure that there wasn't that opportunity to open a lower brand or some other competing business to sell cannabis next door to you. Okay, you think that's possible, Joe?
Through the chair, yes, it's possible to rezone a portion of a lot, or a strata lot in this case.
Okay, well, let's go down that path and that'll make me happy.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Oops, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yes, I've taken the opportunity over the past few months to become more educated about cannabis because I'm old school and definitely was totally against it, but I've come around. It's just like liquor, right? It's, back in the Prohibition days. So my only question actually has to do with, I did have the opportunity to talk to neighboring businesses, and you're absolutely right. No one has an issue with this. The only thing that's not in this report is, what was the feedback from West Shore Parks and Rec? Was there actually any feedback, and how did they look at this?
Jill?
Through the chair, yes, the West Shore Parks and Rec was referred to. They had no concerns, primarily because there's a massive roadway in between the two areas, and also because this is a regulated business via the province.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you. And we have Councillor Day, and I'll be looking for a recommendation.
Thank you. I would like to ask staff why my understanding, my recollection anyways, in going through our regulations was that we were considering where daycares were located as well as where schools are located. And on the proximity map that was included with the report, none of the daycares were noted. And there is the Child and Family Center right across the street used to be called Queen Alexandria. And there's a number of youth serving agencies that are housed there, both provincial and local. So I'm just wondering about those issues.
Jill?
Through the chair, so included as Appendix 1 attached to the report is the cannabis retail store policy. And Section 3, which is supporting information, outlines the required separation distances to be included, and that notes that it's elementary, middle, or secondary schools, other cannabis retail stores, and a city-owned park or playground facility. Daycares were not a type of use that were included within the supporting information for cannabis retail store applications. They were not included within this report.
Okay. Well, I guess I feel like that's a bit of an oversight, because if we're going to worry about schools, why wouldn't we worry about daycares? So That's all right. I'll move on. My other question was, I heard Phil say earlier that he had consulted with other local First Nations, but I didn't hear mention of Songhees, Esquimalt, or Skynu. Did you speak to those nations?
Phil?
Yes, through the chair, yes, we did. Part of the reasoning behind that was to notify them of job opportunities as well. We are in open discussions with the Songhees and understand that they've taken steps on their territorial lands to initiate retail stores as well. However, yes, the answer to your question is yes, we did engage them, and primarily, again, for job notification opportunities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Martin.
Thank you. I will move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. I don't see any virtual hands up, so I will call the question. Those that are opposed to the motion, raise your virtual hand. I'm seeing none, so the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good evening.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to 5.5 Parks and Recreation Master Plan update. Jill.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So I'm here to offer a brief update on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan project. You may recall that OCP implementation item, one of them is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and it's also identified within your strategic plan as a tactic to increase vibrancy. And earlier this year, the city issued a request for proposal seeking interest from qualified parties to undertake the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. The city recently awarded the $90,000 contract, and work has commenced in partnership with Lanark Consultants on Colwood's first ever Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Zooming with us tonight is Kate Evans, principal at Lanark Consultants. And I'll just pass it over to her for a brief minute to introduce herself and Lanark.
Thanks, Jill. Kate, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jill and Mr. Chair. So as Jill mentioned, I am a principal landscape architect and parks planner with Lanark. And first, I would just like to say thank you for the opportunity to participate this evening. And then second, just to express earnestly how our team is quite delighted to be able to work with the City of Colwood on your first Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So a little bit about Lanark. We have been working with communities on Vancouver Island and throughout British Columbia for more than 40 years. And our main office and team for this project is based out of Nanaimo, so not too far away from the City of Colwood. Our key skill sets within our team include parks planning, engagement, and landscape architecture. And we excel at complex problem solving, strategic thinking, and really are kind of specialists along the way at that high level thinking, as well as being grounded in more detailed design as far as when these higher level visions come through to implementation. And so in recent years, we've worked with nearby District of Souk, as well as City of Campbell River, District of Sechelt, the Cowichan Valley Regional District, and several others working to prepare master plans on topics that are quite similar related to parks, trails, recreation, and open spaces. I did have to smile when I saw the virtual backgrounds of each of the councillors this evening, as it really highlights the role and the key role really that parks play in defining the character and identity of Colwood today. And I think that the OCP and recent efforts, including bringing forth this process, really aim to provide that high level and maintain that positive role and improve upon it for the role of parks and recreation in the future. So this process is really, it's an exciting one, and it's a complementary tool to support a little bit further detail specific to parks and recreation about the vision, as well as planning, and giving some tools and framework to staff in the city in terms of policy for managing provision and development of the city's park and recreation system. I'll take one more brief moment just to mention that, of course, we've adjusted our approach in terms of engagement in order to respond to the current situation with COVID-19 and restrictions. And we actually feel that this project in particular, different than some others that we're working on in other topic areas, is actually quite appropriate and nimble to be able to shift and still carry forward with a similar timeline, even with the conditions of physical distancing. And a couple of the reasons for that being that this is the first stage of the project. And so it's really about getting people to gather and share their ideas, raising awareness, sharing what we know, and doing some of the background legwork to communicate to people what the system looks like today. And also because parks are actually one of those refuge points and highlights, I think, for our communities right now, especially the system within Colwood, which is heavily based on trails and natural areas. I know playgrounds are not currently accessible, but that's actually currently not a huge part of the city's facilities. And so we have opportunity to shift and do things like provide weatherproof signage in park locations to let people know about this and reach out to them in physical platforms as well as digital platforms in order to still maintain the same aims that we had for our engagement plan, but just to shift in order to accommodate the ways that we have to carry out that outreach. So I'll leave it. I'll leave that introduction there for now, but I'm here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Kate. I will go to Councillor Jansen, please.
Sorry, I was going to move a recommendation, but I don't see one. But I'm happy to move receipt of this to get started, or what?
That's the exact recommendation, Councillor Jansen. Thank you. So the motion on the floor, Councillor Day.
I have an additional recommendation that I would like to move. But I'll just start with a little bit of history of IACTI. Many of you will know it. IACTI stands for the Intermunicipal Advisory Committee on Disability Issues and has been in existence for over 25 years. Began as a subcommittee in Colwood and has moved on to include Sooke, Metchosin, Highlands, Langford, and Colwood, and advocates for accessible communities and things that support people who need additional access. One of the huge accomplishments that IACTI had was about 10 years ago, recreated the Accessible Walking Guide, which has been hugely distributed. In fact, very few copies actually remain. And that grew out of the desire to of our chair to be able to go beyond the parking lot, because in many instances, people with disabilities, you can go to the parking lot and no farther. So to that end, when we did our guide and brought in about $100,000 worth of improvements to West Shore municipalities through a grant from the province, we came up with a way to measure accessibility and advertise what you'll find in a park without having to put any municipality in a position of having additional liability by just showing people what they're going to encounter in a park through the signage and maps. And one of the difficulties is that incremental change only happens if it's identified. So my motion is that the Parks and Recreation Master Plan include evaluation and documentation of accessibility and targets for improvements to the amount and quality of accessible parks and their amenities, including application of the Accessible Trail Toolkit and signage, and that all road, sidewalk, and parking plans include an evaluation of their accessibility. So I'm hoping that you'll consider that worth documenting, and I'm not suggesting anything that's unaffordable, only that we measure what we've got and work towards improving it.
Thank you. What I will do first, though, Councillor Day, is perhaps we'll call the question on the motion that's on the floor right now, and that's just to receive the report. And
sure.
Then we'll move along. So I will call the question to receive the report, the update rather. Those that are opposed to the update? Not seeing any opposed, so the motion passes. Now, Councillor Day's motion on the floor. Hoping, Amanda, you've got that, or certainly we can get that through video, or Cynthia can email the motion to us as well. So on the motion, Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just love feedback from Jill, please. I mean, this has gone to RFP already, and I would like to know, before we all vote on this, whether this affects the scope of the RFP and the plan that's before us here. I don't want to see any hindrances or roadblocks. So I don't know if this is part of the natural evolution of this master plan, or if this is an addition. And if it is an addition, is there costing attached to that? Is it going to affect the timeline? Those kinds of questions.
Question, Jill?
So through the chair, so there's two things. So this, one of the deliverables of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan is framework for future creation of individual parks management plans. So exactly what would occur at each individual park would occur through each individual parks management plan process. Through this general park master plan policy, there would be current accessibility best practices and considerations, for instance, included. If we're looking for a full detailed accessibility audit of all individual parks in Colwood, that is another consideration as well. So depending on the extent of what we are looking for would depend on if the scope is affected or to what extent it is affected. Ian Borhill is also Zooming in with us tonight as the Director of Long Range Planning and Sustainability, so he may be able to offer further comment to answer Councillor Day's question.
I think that's good. I appreciate that. Thank you. And in all fairness, I don't want to see anything affect this current master plan and the timeline before us in any way. So if it goes beyond scope, then I'm not in support of it affecting this particular plan. Perhaps there's room in another forum on another day or some other kind of motion, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson?
Pretty much the same thoughts as Councillor Jansen, perhaps maybe not as black and white. Obviously, I think nobody's doing a Parks and Recreation Master Plan these days without addressing accessibility. I'd be amazed if there wasn't some acknowledgement of the issue in the plan that we would receive. And I think I heard from Jill is that it might be a high level acknowledgement with more details to come on the various and sundry individual park plans. So that being the case, I'd probably be satisfied with that. I do agree with Councillor Day that we have to be addressing these things and thinking of them. It's just a question of, frankly, I thought it was a very inclusive motion Councillor Day made that sounded to me like it was going to increase the scope of this current work substantially. And maybe we need to let staff and the consultant go in and think about that. As I said, I support the intent of what Councillor Day is trying to do. I just wouldn't want to overwhelm this thing with going so much further into detail of the accessibility that we lost the purpose of the whole report. So I'm a little worried about where this motion's taking us.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. Councillor Day?
I just wanted to ask to hear from the Director of Long Range Planning, because I did provide the motion that I proposed in advance. And I don't believe, based on the work that we did with the toolkit, that what I'm asking for should be terribly complex, because that was kind of the beauty of our toolkit was that it does provide a pretty easy to follow template to describe the accessibility without making huge requirements.
So Ian Borhill, can you answer the question in terms of scope? Will this alter the scope and delay the project or add additional costs?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Okay, great. Yes, I think that there's an understanding amongst council and the consultants and staff that this is a higher level document in terms of the direction of parks planning in Colwood. once we get down to implementing this plan, we'll be looking at accessibility audits and that kind of thing on a park by park level. So I have no concerns with respect to the motion changing the budgetary requirements or the timing of this project. I certainly think as long as the understanding is that this is a higher level document and that accessibility needs will be applied at that appropriate level, that we shouldn't have any problems.
Thank you. So I will call the question now. Those that are opposed to the motion on the floor, moved by Councillor Day. I'm not seeing any virtual hands going up, so the motion passes. Great, so we will, Councillor Parkinson, were you just a little late?
No. Can I just ask,
Yep.
this seems to me to be a pretty dealing with policies and stuff like that. I guess my question is, when do we create a list of the existing parks in Colwood and decide is that enough, or are there some that are surplus, and how do we move forward on that? Because I think in some discussions we had earlier, there were parks thrown around that we wondered whether the city needed or wanted, or was just paying to maintain forever for no public use. So will we be looking at that as part of this document, or is that a further document?
Jill?
Through the chair. So attached as Appendix 1 is just a brief schedule of work, and it's broken out into 3 general phases. So for the question as to when are we looking at what we have, that's actually occurring right now. The consultant team is undergoing data gathering and analysis, looking at all those things. They've been working with an internal group of staff to provide background and information. As for what one of the intended outcomes of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan is that it will identify strategic priorities and actions about future directions for policies and priorities regarding property acquisitions, parks planning, development, design, and delivery of amenities, programs, and services.
All right. Hopefully that answered your question, Stuart. So they're looking at that now. But, all right, well, we'll move on to the next item, and that's 5.6, the 2020 Development Cost Charge Review for roads. Brent, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Logan, I appreciate it very much. I'm pleased to advise that the city is engaged with a contractor whose name is Rachel Sansom, and Rachel has prepared, working with staff, the PowerPoint presentation they'll be reviewing tonight, and both Rachel and I are available to answer any questions that you may have with the report. Thank you very much, and Rachel, hopefully you can hear me and you will unmute.
Rachel, over to you.
Okay, well,
And
thank
welcome.
you so much. Thank you so much, Chair Logan and councillors, for having me this evening. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to try to share the screen and see if we can't get the PowerPoint up. There it is. Can everyone see that?
Yep, perfect, thank you.
I'll just leave it in tile view, probably easier to manage. So, in working with Brett and then staff, the purpose of this evening's report is just as an introduction, a refresher, and a primer to what development cost charges are and how the process works. Currently, Colwood is looking at updating the roads portion of their development cost charge bylaw. So we thought perhaps it would be a good idea just to kind of go through what development cost charges are and how they function with committee, and then look forward to working through the technical details at later meetings. So certainly we'll be jotting down all the questions that we'll be looking to address. I'm sure there'll be many. And putting together a package for committee and council review in the short term, hopefully at the next meeting. So briefly then, what are DCCs? So DCCs are a mechanism provided, I'll skip to the next. They're a mechanism provided by the Local Government Act to collect costs from the benefiting users. So development puts demand on existing utilities. DCCs are a way to fund that upgrades that are required from development, and it's divided proportionally between what one thinks development is going to require and also benefits for existing users. So as we work through the program, there's always going to be a split between what the development community pays and what the taxpayer would pay. The allowable projects within the Local Government Act include roadworks, drainage, sewer, water, parkland, park improvements, and all of this involves capacity upgrades and not maintenance or general capital works. So here's a slide showing your current DCC program. Currently, the DCCs include for the City of Colwood roads and sewers, and the DCCs are allocated on a per unit basis. So you can see the different types of development. We have single family, townhousing, duplex, apartment, commercial, industrial, and institutional. And as we work through the program, we come up with a unit value for each based on, again, the impact on the community for each of those categories. The water is actually administered by the CRD, Integrated Water Services. And then the school charge, it's not a DCC, it's actually an acquisition charge, is also levied on residential development. So the need to update the current bylaw, the roads section of your current bylaw is actually coming to an end of its tenure. Most of the road projects have been completed. There are new road projects in your transportation master plan and traffic studies that actually indicate additional roadworks required to support new development. And that those new developments really need to make a contribution to this infrastructure as soon as possible. So things that are getting constructed today should be paying into the kitty for the new works. Also, many of those new developments are required to perform some of those works that could be DCC projects, and they would be able to receive credit from their DCCs payable for some of the works that they perform. Any questions so far? Are we doing okay?
I think you're doing okay, Rachel.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So the development cost charge, again, it is a provision of the Local Government Act. It's section 559, if anybody cares to delve into that document. They can be very simple at the same time. So development cost charge for 20 years, and it's a changing policy document. It's interesting in how it can be applied. But the rules are fairly straightforward, and it is it has to go to the oh, I have an unstable internet connection. That's not good. The inspector for municipalities does actually have to approve the bylaw to make sure it's in compliance with that Local Government Act. It also considers, of course, the official community plan for Colwood, the financial plan, and in the case of roads, the transportation master plan. So the calculation for the DCCs, again, this is a very simplistic view of it, but we take the entire cost of the agreed upon new infrastructure, and then we divide it by the units of assumed growth and plug that into a spreadsheet and determine the level of service for each particular type of development. Again, different categories for single family, multifamily, commercial, and industrial. So as we go through this process, you'll get to see all those spreadsheets and you'll get to see all that math. So again, just working through the process then we're going to be embarking on is that we'll identify projects in accordance with your transportation master plan to support your projected development. And again, this is in accordance with your official community plan, as well as the transportation master plan. We're going to have a look at what benefits existing population. So some of the growth, some of the development will be paying for a portion, and some of it will be paid for by the taxpayer. It depends on what the project is, where it is, and how much each, whether the taxpayer or development will attribute to that project. It is, again, only projects associated with growth and capacity improvements, again, not maintenance. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, there's an additional, it's a funny little piece of the legislation. It's an assist factor. What this does is it's reflection of how council desires to encourage development. It's a minimum of 1%. That is a kind of an across the board percentage that's applied. In some jurisdictions, when they're easing in a development cost charge program, that number can be higher and gets reduced over time as laid out in the bylaw. Currently, I believe Colwood has a 1% assist factor, and I think the desire currently is to maintain that 1%. Again, that'll be discussed when we get into the technical part of the program. So the DCC calculation is based on assumed growth over 20 years. You can choose a horizon, but currently the 20-year horizon is what all the transportation study is based on. So the 20-year growth at 2% results in a population of around 26,000, so about 4,300 new residents. And again, an increase in commercial and institutional building, as well as new industrial, which is measured by hectares. And this all came out of a demographic study and yield analysis that I believe was performed by Colliers last year. The DCC has to form part of the financial plan. Again, the project list complements sustainable infrastructure funding. We believe, and we'll get this number solidified, that there's 4.2 million currently in the Road DCC's fund. We do also recommend updating the DCC every 5 years, just to keep abreast of new developments, economic realities, and demographics. If there's a huge upshoot in development, then you might want to increase it. If things are slowing down, you might want to dial it down to encourage new development and keep things affordable. One of the things that council will have to consider is the effect on the cost of development as well as affordable housing. DCC credits, again, are available to developers that are required to build any of the improvements on the project list. There are exemptions allowed under the Local Government Act, places of worship, residential units less than 29 square meters, so secondary suites or small cottages, and building permits under $50,000. We can also apply reductions to encourage not-for-profit rental housing, for-profit affordable rentals, and low environmental impacts. So council can decide what percentage of development cost charge they wish to reduce the DCCs by in order to encourage those types of development. So again, the project availability, development or expansion of assets to service an increasing population. What we cannot include in the program are replacing aging assets, maintenance of existing assets, upgrading to meet regulatory requirements, technology solutions to improve levels of service, improved amenities requested by existing residents. Quite often though, in a program, if you're doing roads, some things can be replaced as a byproduct. For example, if you need to overlay or replace street lights, some of those things can fit into the bylaw. So that's kind of working through the more detailed technical issues. You don't have to make that decision on a project by project basis. If the project on the whole is to increase capacity, then it qualifies as a DCC project. So in selecting the projects, arterial and collector roads are the focus. Again, moving people and vehicles, including bicycles and pedestrians, are also a critical part of the road infrastructure. And based on the transportation master plan, there's been several individual traffic studies that have been submitted with recent developments that could also be included. So within a roads development cost charge, essentially the entire roads cross section is eligible, including storm drainage, intersections, traffic signals, drainage, bridges, bicycles, and also upgrades to your transportation master plan. Parking lots, local roads not used by development, and maintenance and management of existing roads are not eligible. So this next slide is just an example. Of course, there's probably more intersections to focus on than this. However, intersections are going to be broken out in the program as individual projects for council consideration. And this next slide is just an example of how we're going to value the DCC projects. We do have some estimates from professional engineering firms, and we also have unit rates and values that we can apply to estimates to quantify the costs for each individual road. And we'll consider the cross sections as they came out of the transportation master plan, as far as what they're recommending for lanes, widths, bicycle lanes, and other infrastructure. Those will all go into a spreadsheet and be calculated by unit value. And myself and staff will also view all these on the ground and make sure that there's nothing, you know, obviously you'll take into account things that are already in place that don't need to be replaced, as well as anything else that comes up in the tour of the town. I believe, Brent, you had something you wanted to say about Ocean Boulevard.
I did. Thank you very much. So just as we trade in between each other here, I did want to address Ocean Boulevard because it's obviously something that we spent a lot of time looking at with our opportunity to recently close it. And on June 1st, we're going to be getting a bit of an update and a refresh from Dan Casey. So the information that's presented to committee tonight is essentially a building block for how we're going to be moved forward. As Rachel pointed out, this is how the DCC program, what it is and how it works. And our next intention to come back to committee and council is with the list. And I felt that Ocean Boulevard was a relevant slide to put in here because of how much focus we've had on it. But this is what is currently shown in that transportation master plan for this stretch of roadway. In that same document, this is considered a collector roadway. And so as a collector roadway, typically you're trying to separate some of the uses. And this is an excellent example of an item that may need to be refreshed as we're moving forward. And one of the things that Urban Systems with Dan Casey will bring forward on June 1 is the consideration about this no longer being a collector roadway, is to move it to that of a local roadway and even speak to some of the ramifications if we elected to close it intermittently or for greater periods of time. So thank you, Rachel. Carry on, and then at the end, I'll pop back in. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Brent. Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, can I just ask a quick question on something I just heard?
Yes, sorry.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Cynthia.
So sorry, I hate breaking in, but I just heard over Rachel speaking, saying that in some cases, upgrades to the transportation master plan could be included in the development cost charge. Did I hear that right?
Yes, if I may, through the chair, that is correct. That will form part of the project list.
Okay, just because I know that it's something that is on our list to do, and I don't know, I'm just wondering what is involved in putting the update to our transportation master plan into the development cost charges.
So maybe let's Rachel, maybe let's just finish off the slides and then we can get back to that particular question.
Thank you, Chair. So the next steps then, which we're currently, we've started this already, but we wasn't ready to share with committee this evening, is we're reviewing and confirming and estimating all the eligible construction costs for a list of roads that were generated by the transportation master plan, as well as I believe Allendale Road is now included, and I don't think that was in the transportation master plan to start with. So we go through, again, all the road segments, all the cross sections as recommended by the transportation master plan and other studies, quantify the costs. And we do have quite a few professionally prepared cost estimates from local engineers that we will use for some of the roads. And we'll also use those templates and unit costs to confirm the costs of other roads within the city. We'll determine for every single road what the benefits to existing users are, which would be the taxpayer, and what benefits new development in order to split the costs. We'll determine the road's development cost charge, unit charge for each class of development. So that's single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial, institutional. And then we'll present this draft roads DC report back to you. council for review and direction. We should have that ready for June of this year, if not earlier. And then it'll probably be quite an intensive review with a lot of discussion, I hope. And at which point we'll incorporate those changes per council direction and come up with a new list and new unit costs. Part of the development cost charge approval process is stakeholder consultation, and quite often you put together an ad hoc group of developers and other community members that will have a chance to review the bylaw and discuss impacts on them. And then the general public will have a chance to see the bylaws and speak at regular council and committee meetings per usual. So the target date for first reading of this bylaw, all going well, would be July or August of this year. So thank you very much, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that. Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to get things started and move the recommendation here. Thank you to our guests. I don't have any questions at this time.
Great. Thank you. So on the motion on the floor, Councillor Day. Are you okay?
I'm just wondering about the inclusion of the cost for upgrading the transportation master plan. And I'm fine if that needs to come back to a future meeting. It's just, in thinking about it, it's been a significant cost and a big undertaking for us to do the transportation master plan. And I guess it's mostly driven by development.
So Brent or Rachel, would that impact the cost and timing?
Yes, if I may, Brent, and through the chair. Yes, it will be a line item just like any other project. There'll be a cost to updating the master plan. We'll probably get a few quotes in from some local transportation consultants. And again, the cost will be split between taxpayers and development. So what portions of that study are going to be to accommodate new growth and what recommendations support existing transportation.
Hi, Councillor Logan, if I may as well interject as well, is we've actually started to initialize portions of this in working with urban systems. And similar to how this is going as an introductory to the amendment, what we're planning on doing is bringing a refresh and a consideration from the 2014 to 2020 to see how life has changed in regards to the transportation master plan, which will start to gain that direction that Councillor Day is I think almost reaching out for and saying, well, how are these costs going to be covered and can it be included in this? And the majority of those roads that are presently in the transportation master plan will be carried forward, and some of which will be part of developer driven needs for expansion. And so that's why that can be included in those works.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson on the motion.
Just wondering, one of your slides, you say the Local Government Act requires that projects in the DCC bylaw are funded in a financial plan. And yet our financial plan is a 5-year financial plan, and our road plans are going much beyond that. Is that a conflict there, or am I misreading that?
If I may, through the chair, I believe that they will show up in the 5-year financial plan, and then they just get adjusted for every consecutive 5-year plan. So it's a 20-year build out for the roads DCC program. So as part of the work will be prioritizing and deciding what projects get done when, and they would occur in those 5-year segments.
And if I may, Councillor Parkinson, in our present consideration for 2020 and beyond are the 2 expenditures that we are likely to come out of our present program, which is the Allendale Works and the Latorian Veterans Memorial Parkway work. So those expenditures have been considered in this financial cycle.
Correct, but the DCC program is going to be, as Rachel says, for the next 20 years worth of roads. I don't know, let's say it's $30 or $40 million. Do we then show that in our current financial plan and then roll it forward when we don't actually build anything? And in which case does our financial plan balance if we're showing expenditures, mythical expenditures of that amount?
I do see Brent, just to step in there, I just see our CAO has his hand up. He might be able to answer that one. Robert?
Thank you, Chair Logan. Administration will work with council in the coming months and years to extend our capital planning component of our financial planning beyond the 5-year mark. Certainly with our major infrastructures, such as our roadways and their redevelopment, a 5-year timeframe is likely far too short-sighted for appropriate capital planning work. So administration will work with council. We will create a financial plan and supporting capital plan that looks beyond the 5 years. And that said, beyond that, things are grouped up into potential spending by decade after that juncture. And so it will be captured in our long-term planning. Our technical 5-year plan won't contain it, but we will have capital planning that goes beyond the 5-year mark that aligns with our DCC bylaw and with our long-term thinking.
Thank you for that. And if I may, Councillor Logan, there's also a section here on exemptions and reductions, and presumably we'll have a discussion about that at the appropriate time.
I'm assuming so, yes. Robert, that would be correct, or Brent?
Yes, sorry, Chair Logan, absolutely correct. When the bylaw comes back, if council would like to have a specific discussion with respect to exemptions, we can provide greater clarity on what the act allows, and then distill council's expectations in terms of what you'd like to see in the bylaw.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands, I will call the question on the motion. Those that are opposed to the staff recommendation before us? Not seeing any virtual hands, so the motion passes. Thank you very much. I will, we're just going to take a quick break so we can stretch our legs and be back here at 8 o'clock. So Amanda, are you able to just stop the recording?
No, but I can mute everybody.
Okay. All right, everybody, it's 1 minute to 8, so we're going to be resuming pretty quickly.
Get rid of my alter ego there, I guess, eh?
I don't know, I think it was better looking. We're just awaiting Councillor Day and Kobayashi. Ah, there he is. He was probably playing with his new puppy. Let's give Councillor Day another moment.
Are we live yet, Gordon?
We are live. Yep. So if you've got a clean joke for us, Councillor Jansen.
I don't know any.
Yeah.
Just want to thank Brent for answering all the questions from me today, and Councillor Parkinson. Thank you. It was a great education. I wish I had this DCC thing a year and a half ago. That'd have been great. Thank you.
Yes.
No
Thanks,
problem,
Doug.
Doug. There'll be lots of questions coming up. So they were a good primer. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully everybody got up and stretched their legs. So we will resume the meeting and go with 5.7 Olympic View Design Standards, Amendment to Bylaw 285 and Bylaw 1612. And I'd like to invite Aaron Knutson, the Intermediate Engineering Technologist, to introduce the item. Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me loud and clear?
We can, yes.
Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen here, a little PowerPoint. All right, can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation?
It's beautiful.
Awesome. All right, so yes, I'm presenting the report for the Olympic View Road and Boulevard Design Standards as they're proposed by the Olympic View Development Team. I will be available for questions at the end of this presentation, and we'll get started. Just to start off, I actually just made a quick change to my presentation, so the package you have in the agenda may be slightly different. I just moved this slide up to the top to help me introduce the topic. So the developer of the Olympic View Lands is proposing specific design standards for road design and boulevard landscaping to be applied to the internal road network. The lands we're speaking about are shown roughly in the location plan right here. So that's phase 1, and then the Olympic View Lands is the largest area around. And as well, I'm showing phase 1 here of the development that is actually underway currently, with site grading and blasting underway now, with underground storm and drain and sewer to commence shortly. The two main purposes for this consideration, firstly, the city's current subdivision and development bylaw number 285 is largely out of date and does not represent the city's current vision and goals for pedestrian and cycling friendly infrastructure. As well, it does not specify alternate drainage systems. The second purpose of this report is the city's been working closely with the developer and their consultants to produce a development that follows site adaptive principles as well as sustainable infrastructure practices. The report has been broken up into subsections that discuss road design standards, street lighting, and boulevard landscaping. Staff is seeking a resolution to establish specific design standards for the Olympic View lands through an amendment to the bylaw 285, as well as the speed regulation bylaw 1612. The recommendations that staff are recommending are as follows on the screen here. The proposed road design standards, including furniture, lighting, boulevard landscaping, be accepted as the road standard to be applied within the Olympic View development lands. And staff be directed to draft an amendment to Colwood Subdivision and Development of Land Bylaw 1995, Bylaw 285, adding the specific design standards for Olympic View lands to the bylaw as appendix or a schedule. As well, staff be directed to draft an amendment to Colwood Speed Regulation Bylaw number 1612, reducing the design speed for local roads from 50 kilometers an hour to 40 kilometers an hour for through roads, and from 50 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers an hour for cul-de-sac roads specific to the Olympic View lands. So with that, we'll move into the road design standards for the local roads and collector roads. You can see on this slide here, we're just mostly showing phase 1 of the development, but you can see there's a collector road here that wraps around the entire development within Langford and Colwood. And then there's also internal local roads within the network. So starting with local roads, table 1 here compares the works that are being proposed by the developer versus the works that are required by bylaw 285. The proposed design standards for local road meet or exceed the intent of Colwood's bylaw. As you can see, comparing these values that they either meet or exceed the works required by the bylaw, as I said. A 1.8 meter wide sidewalk on one side is being proposed by the developer for the local road, whereas the bylaw requires a 1.5 meter wide sidewalk. There would be roadside dedicated parking bays, which are listed down here, right here. So the bylaw does not require roadside parking bays. It's just a wider road surface, whereas the developer is proposing the roadside parking bays. There is LED street lighting proposed by the developer, and the bylaw does not specify LED specific. As well, boulevard landscaping, which includes plantings, boulevard trees, and irrigation, are being proposed by the developer for local roads. And the bylaw actually only requires grass boulevards. So those are all sort of takeaways and additions to our bylaw. In addition to those items, rain gardens are also being proposed to supplement underground storm drain system, which I will get into a little later on in the presentation.
Can we ask questions right now?
Aaron, how long's your presentation?
I would say between 10 and 12 minutes, I think.
Yeah, Doug, I would ask if you could just hold off and then so we don't ruin the momentum, and then we can always go back to a slide.
Not a problem.
Yeah, thanks though.
Okay, thank you. So here I have the cross sections taken from the subdivision bylaw 285 and the proposed cross section for a local road from Olympic View. As you can see, they're mostly in line with each other. You know, sidewalk on one side is shown here for the bylaw, sidewalk on one side shown here for the Olympic View cross section. Like I said previously, really the main difference is the road width surface for our bylaw is 10 meters, which allows for 2 travel lanes and essentially a parking lane on one side or alternating. And the proposed section proposes, what is it, a 6-meter wide road, so travel lanes with a dedicated parking bay of 2.5 or 2.6 meters width. I think that's about it for those 2 cross sections for right now. Then we'll move into the transportation master plan. So the transportation master plan has a typical section for local roads, and it actually calls for sidewalks on both sides, which is, different than our bylaw as well as what's being proposed. The road width is in line with what's being proposed, but definitely narrower than our bylaw. Yeah, that's about it, I would say, for that at the moment. Next, we get into collector roads. From the table here, again, most of the items largely meet or exceed our bylaw. For instance, road right-of-way widths are similar. Concrete curb and gutter, yes on both. What else? Street lighting is both. Boulevard landscaping, again, we're getting some improvements with the plantings and trees and irrigation, which are not typically or not specified in our bylaw currently. As part of the proposed works for the collector roads, the developer's proposing a 3-meter wide multi-use pathway, which replaces the specified 1.5 meter sidewalks on both sides that's in our bylaw. And as well would replace bike lanes on the road, which are not specified in our bylaw currently. The multi-use pathway will help to reduce the overall road width, as well as help with reducing vehicle speeds and protect pedestrians and novice cyclists from vehicles. Incorporating the multi-use pathway, the right-of-way width and hard surfacing area can be reduced, which lessens the impact of the existing natural areas that the developer and the city are intending to preserve as best as we can. The use of the multi-use pathway is supported in the Transportation Master Plan, where it speaks to encourage pedestrian and cycling activity. So here we have the collector road cross sections, one taken from our bylaw 285 and the other as proposed by the developer. As I was discussing previously, you can see the difference already is that there's 2 sidewalk on both sides here. And in this case down for the proposed works, we have the one single multi-use pathway, which is 3 meters wide. The road width again has been narrowed considerably from 12 meters, which would have allowed 2 travel lanes with parking lanes on both sides of the road. And in the proposed works case, we're looking at 2 travel lanes at 6.6 meters with the separated multi-use pathway. There will only really be parking provided or roadside parking provided at the commercial nodes. And for this reason is mostly to sort of allow for traffic flow on the collector roads, just taking a higher priority for that instead of parking, and allowing most of the parking to happen within the neighborhood roads. And so here we have the collector road cross section from the Transportation Master Plan. And right off the bat, the biggest difference is showing buffered bike lanes here. and separated sidewalks, whereas the developer is proposing the 3-meter multi-use pathway. Otherwise, most of the elements are very similar. So moving on, we now get into the road design speed proposal. Typically, the subdivision development bylaw 285 only speaks to a design speed of 50 kilometers an hour. That does make it difficult to design, kind of neighborhood roads that don't act as a main collector road or an arterial road. So we come across this issue quite often with our developments, trying to allow for a nice neighborhood road with lower speeds. So as you can see, the Colwood bylaw is 50 kilometers an hour. They are proposing 40 kilometers an hour for through roads, for local roads, and 30 kilometers an hour for the cul-de-sac local roads. For the collector road, again, the bylaw just calls for 50 kilometers an hour. And the proposed speed limit is mostly to stay at 50 kilometers an hour. However, there is a short section of the Road C, which is the extension of Castlewood Terrace, that will require a reduction to 40 kilometers an hour, basically for topography reasons, just some challenging grades that we need to work through. So any changes that are made to the road design speed, an amendment to bylaw 285, we will also need to do an amendment to bylaw 1612, which is the speed regulation bylaw. Next, we're moving into the street lighting. Colwood's current standard for street lighting is a cyclone LED type, which is this side mount type here. It is an LED, as I said, with side mount and downcast. It is dark sky compliant. The developer, however, is proposing a different standard, which is a Lumca LED. It is also downcast and a side mount style. Definitely a different design. Our current color for the posts and heads are black blue, which is in our bylaw 285. The developer, however, is requesting or proposing black, which is actually different than what's shown on my slide here, because it was a very recent change in direction, as they had initially wanted to go with steel gray, but changed gears and are proposing black. Further details on the street lighting can be found in Appendix A of the report if you want to dig in there further. Now we move into the boulevard landscaping. Again, using site adaptive design principles and sustainable development practices, developers proposing specific boulevard treatments and landscaping. Planted rain gardens and natural type boulevard landscaping are being proposed instead of typical grass boulevards and ditches with underground storm drains. The natural type landscaping includes rock patches, natural grass areas that will require little maintenance. There will be pockets of native plantings with larger areas of coarse rock mulch landscaping. The natural vegetated areas are to reduce maintenance and blend well with the existing vegetation, as well as convey storm water. The proposed boulevard areas will integrate with storm drain design through planted rain gardens. Proposed boulevard landscaping standards have been reviewed by engineering staff, as well as the City Public Works Department, and were also discussed at a meeting with the applicant's landscape architect, Paul DeGreef of Murdoch DeGreef, and the engineering consultant, Jeff Somerville of WSP. Some of the key items from that discussion were the developer has proposed a 2-year maintenance period on all the boulevard landscape works to allow a more complete establishment period prior to the city accepting the landscape works. Staff anticipate a bi-weekly maintenance schedule. The rock mulch landscaping would require similar or reduced level of maintenance compared to typical grass cutting and weeding. The intent of the proposed design is to keep boulevards as natural as possible. And you can sort of see on the top sketch here, you can see the gray area is intended to represent the rock mulch that is formed around some of the plantings and trees. And then the green catchment sort of areas here are to represent the pockets of rain gardens, which will be planted. And then you also have catchment zones, which will be underneath the rock faces, which we require basically a 3-meter buffer area before any sidewalk, multi-use pathway, road surface, to have a 3-meter buffer to allow for rocks falling from the rock face. So that sort of plays into that rock mulch landscape design. The next slide, I have just a typical shot of the rain gardens that they are proposing. You can sort of see some of the plantings that they're proposing, some tall grasses with some little shrubberies on top. And then you've got the storm drain system as well, with the beehive casting and the perforated pipe that would tie into the main storm drain, act as a sort of an overflow for whatever water cannot be permeate into the ground. Okay, so in conclusion, the proposed road design standards largely meet the intent of Colwood's TMP and OCP by providing safer sidewalks and multi-use pathways. They improve pedestrian and cycling connectivity, adjustment of road grades to suit site adaptive development. The boulevard landscape standards generally follow the OCP's vision for site adaptive development and sustainable infrastructure. Supplemental pockets of plantings are in balance with the natural vegetation. As well, rain gardens will help treat stormwater before entering the storm drain system and water course on Latoria Road, which is Latoria Creek. So for those reasons, staff is in support of the proposed road design standards, as well as the natural boulevard landscape standards. In closing, I would just like to repeat the options available. The proposed road design standards, including furniture, lighting, boulevard landscaping, be accepted as a road standard to be applied within the Olympic View development lands, and staff be directed to draft an amendment to Colwood Subdivision Development Land Bylaw 1995, bylaw number 285, adding the specific design standards for Olympic View lands to the bylaw as an appendix or schedule. And staff be directed to draft an amendment to Colwood Speed Regulation Bylaw number 1612, reducing the design speed for local roads from 50 kilometers an hour to 40 kilometers an hour for through roads and 30 kilometers an hour for cul-de-sac roads specific to the Olympic View lands. Or the proposed road design standards, including furniture, lighting, and boulevard landscape, not be accepted as the road standard within Olympic View developing lands, and the transportation master plan be applied as the road design standard with the design speed considerations remaining as considered in bylaw 1612. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. And just would like to point out that we actually have the developer of Olympic View, Peter de Zwager, here with us tonight, as well as the developer's engineer, Jeff Somerville, and the landscape architect, Paul de Grief, to help answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you very much. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Fantastic, Aaron. Thank you very much. So I will go to committee then, and Councillor Day, you're first on the hopper.
Great, thank you very much. Couple of questions from the presentation. I have never heard the term rock mulch before. What is that?
I might turn this to Paul DeGrief, maybe the landscape architect. Paul, are you?
I am here. Hopefully you can hear me.
You bet.
And yeah, it's a great question. I had a hunch that the question might come up, and probably the best thing I can do is point to a few roads around Colwood where the same expected end result is really what we're hoping to achieve with the rock mulch. So along Veterans Memorial, just before arriving at the Olympic View site, as you're coming down the hill, the road was actually blasted wide enough for an extra lane on either side. And there's essentially a gravel verge with a ditch on either side that's been constructed to catch rock as it falls off the rock faces, which are quite high on that section of Veterans Memorial. And essentially what you're seeing there is coarse rock with native tree species that are starting to recolonize that what essentially is just a rocky substrate. So trees like red alder that are eking out in existence. And that's essentially the character of the landscape that we're actually going to want to build. It's a native dominated landscape. And there will be pockets of planting that are irrigated, almost all native plants, but then large areas will essentially be rock mulch that we expect some native trees to, again, eke out a living in. But the intent is to keep those largely as a rock surface.
Thank you. So it's essentially gravel.
That is correct. Yep.
Okay. And my next question is the multi-use path. What material is it made out of?
So I can answer that too. And Jeff, if you want to jump in here at any point, feel free to interrupt me. This is proposed as an asphalt surface.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think the width of the multi-use path is 3 meters. Is that correct?
Yes, again, that is correct. That is proposed at 3 meters.
Okay, and do you know what the slope of the multi-use path will be? I know the roadway specifications say it can be up to 12%, but I'm just wondering if either the cross slope or the linear slope of the multi-use path will have different limitations.
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, Jeff, if you want to jump in here, if I make a mistake, feel free to, but I believe most of the road sections that we're dealing with are in that 8% range, with the exception of possibly a section of Road C, the extension of Castlewood into the site. And I believe there's a short section there that reaches that 12% range. But the majority of roads are under 8% and well under.
Okay. The width of the sidewalk opposite the multi-use path, I think, is 1.5 meters. Is that correct?
Yeah, Aaron here. Yeah, actually, the figure that's shown in my report is actually capturing the extension of VMP, which is actually just a short section. And the reason why a sidewalk is shown on the opposite side of the multi-use pathway is there's going to be a multi-use development on sort of the right-hand side. And we really wanted to still maintain that connectivity for pedestrians so that they're not having to cross the collector road to get to the multi-use pathway. So, you know, we really felt like we needed another sidewalk on that side. But for the rest of the collector road within the lands, you're just going to have the multi-use pathway, except for where, you know, bus stops may need a section of sidewalk to help with safety and connectivity.
Okay, so sidewalks adjacent to transit stops are really important. And I'm assuming, would there be connections to the multi-use pathway from the transit stops then if there isn't sidewalk?
Good question.
Maybe Jeff, if you could maybe speak to this item,
Sure.
please.
Yeah,
Jeff?
thanks, Aaron. I'm happy to jump in here. Yes, we've thought about that. Obviously, excuse me, when the bus is traveling the same direction as the multi-use path, we'll have a concrete infill section so that there's accessibility to the bus stop. But on the opposite direction, where we have no multi-use path on that side of the road, there will be a sidewalk constructed for whatever is reasonable, likely a block, just so that we can actually get pedestrians to a safe crossing point.
Thanks, Jeff. I think Brent wants to jump in here too and just add a little bit.
Yeah,
Brent?
just thanks very much, Chair Logan. Just if we want to flip back, and I believe it's page 205 of your agenda, to kind of get a scale on what Aaron's sort of talking about, and it's tough to get a scale as we work through the rest of the site. But I'll just wait for you guys to get to that page. It's the image that shows the subdivision. And you can see on the left-hand side of the image, it's the portion of the lands that we're working on right now. So when Aaron speaks to that dual sidewalk intent from the multifamily working its way back out to the intersection with Veterans Memorial Parkway, it's on Road A collector that he's referring to. And that multi-use site is that site on the right-hand side as you're working your way back towards Veterans Memorial Parkway. But one of the is everyone with me and looking at that image? One of the extensive things which I appreciate council seeking focus on, and which Jeff has recently spoken to, is that connecting of the individual development area, whether that be a multifamily site or a cul-de-sac, where it's on the same side without that multi-use trail. There has been discussions, and we appreciate the developer's willingness and the engineering team that's behind them. To say, no, we agree that connectivity is critically important to ensure that our transit service is part of the first priority that can be enabled in the land. Transit, though, is one of those services that's difficult, only in the sense that we plan for it and they tend to come a little bit later, but we're attempting to get all those design elements brought forward now, so that way transit understands the objectives and is part of our review process in doing this collector loop that ultimately comes through the site and back out, starting and ending on Latoria.
Okay. So my next question is about the lighting. And just for some of the history, we've had different lighting for specific areas for a while now in Colwood, probably 20 years or so. And it has become an issue in terms of keeping stock of parts so that there isn't long lead times when something needs to be replaced, and having different styles can be problematic. So I'm just wondering if we wanted to propose an amendment so that we kept the city standard, would that be simply eliminating lighting from the motion?
Ren?
Sorry, I was talking away there and was slightly unmuted. Cynthia, Councillor Day, this is something that we have very much looked at. And as we morph our bylaw or try to bring it to a more present standard, what we're focusing on is I'm going to call it the meat inside the light design as being uniform, so we can continue to repair those without any special aspect. If council, though, is unfavorable with the look and feel, Very much so. What you could do is pull that one item out and say, no, we'd like it to be this other standard, or we disagree. Council could go and even so far, or a committee could go so far as to recommend to council a different color if they wished. But we're trying to keep the ballast, which is part of the consideration that we've brought forward. So the function of the light constant, so we can bring easier repair to them and easier stock of supplies. It's one of the things we've been trying to actively correct in the last year.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just add on to what Brent was mentioning, we're also sort of looking at areas of Colwood that are going to have specific designs. So when you're in Royal Bay, you sort of know you're in Royal Bay. When you're in Olympic View, you know you're in Olympic View. So we've sort of started that already by allowing Royal Bay to have a slightly different standard than this Cyclone LED type that's shown on the slide here. So that's sort of what we're trying to allow here, is just have these specific design standards for these large development areas. But then outside of those areas, we would stick with the standard in the bylaw. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
was that Aaron speaking?
That was, yes.
Thank you. So thank you, and I will just say that I think that Colwood should look like Colwood, and I really do think that we should have a standard that is everywhere. Just my opinion, but people can see it their own way. I am a little bit worried about the reduced road width from 20 meters to 18 meters because I have observed over the last 20 years with the development of Royal Bay that young people are basically riding their bikes on the sidewalks in order to avoid conflicts with traffic. And I'm just wondering if staff or the developer have any comments on the connectivity of the multi-use path and whether or not it is a viable alternative.
So through the chair, I just want to ensure that I've heard the question correctly, and then I may actually ask Jeff to join me in this sort of response. Jeff from WSP. So the 3 meters of width is almost a uniform standard that I would certainly ask Jeff to fill in more information. But what I also hear you asking is about the safety parameters of the cyclist, the choice of the family commute as opposed to the commuter commute, and how they're likely to use the roadway. And that is one of the significant factors of reduced speeds as well. Recent studies have come up, and frankly, I can't pretend to be an expert in them. But recent studies have come up that have suggested that if you can reduce the travel speed in the road, you reduce your injury by accident really substantially. And there are figures, I'm sorry I don't have them off the top of my head, which speaks of a speed reduction from 50 to 40. Other municipalities have launched initiatives to try and do this. And where we've got local roads that maybe not terminating in a cul-de-sac, but are just providing single family access to single family, those are the roads where we've been thinking 30, which creates very much a dynamic, safe environment for a Sharrow type experience on the roadway. There are stats which help support that. And maybe Jeff can talk about to some of the width proposals that we've seen for the multi-uses being met with 3. Jeff?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Brent. A couple things, Councillor Day. We really wanted to make sure that people drive to the speed of the road, what they feel comfortable with on the road. So we're not proposing to simply post these roads at, say, 40 or 30. We're actually designing the road to that standard. So there'll be tighter curves, both vertical and horizontal. And what that does is it really lets the driver realize that they need to slow down for the travel. And they're a bit more hyper aware of pedestrians and cyclists. And the implementation of the multi-use trail, what that does is it really eliminates the shared space. So you don't have cyclists on the road with the cars. you have quite a large separation, and where we can, we're putting a generous boulevard in there. So there's quite a bit of physical distance between cars and pedestrians and cyclists. In terms of the multi-use trail being 3 meters wide, we did go back and forth quite a bit with staff on this one. We felt once you get over 3 meters wide, that is almost a lane width for a car. And you can get some issues where cars can turn onto that surface, they can drive on it. It's not as comfortable and sort of rural, I guess you might say. But 3 meters is plenty to have enough space that pedestrians and cyclists don't have the same conflicts as they would in, say, like a 2.5 meter multi-use trail. For example, the Galloping Goose, in some cases, it's actually less than 3 meters right now. And the CRD is proposing to go to anywhere from 3 to 4 meters for that that volume of a multi-use trail. So once you get into the 4 meter range, it's too generous, and the speeds can increase. And then you've got issues with pedestrian and cyclist conflicts.
I guess what I'm actually looking for, I recognize the two-way traffic on a 3 meters space can work, but I'm looking, because there's no plan that shows me where through the development the multi-use trail goes. I'm wondering how usable is it in terms of, you know, say you live on that cul-de-sac over there, but maybe you can't get to the highway or the multi-use trail. So I just don't, at this point, have an understanding of how easily accessed the multi-use trail is.
So through the chair, and Jeff, please come in. I recognize when we were going through some of the report that it's difficult to see how this road carries on. And it's because the developer is very much focusing on phase one, trying to actualize phase one before we carry on to the next stages. However, we have received road plans. We've looked at the connectivity for the surrounding lands. And so the road that extends from Veterans Memorial Parkway extends southward, essentially to the southernmost extent of the lands, loops to the west, goes by a commercial area, loops into Langford, and then comes right back out. So it's one contiguous road that goes all the way back out, starts at Veterans Memorial Parkway in Latoria, and comes out to around where the Castlewood entrances are. There will be some other access points into Langford, but that's the primary loop. And the multi-use path is intended to provide that loop. And so it will parallel that main arterial connection all the way through. Interestingly, I cannot speak for the Langford standard of that multi-use through it, but for the Colwood portion, it will be continuous and contiguous and connect the single family and the residential and the multifamily sites to the commercial area, which is around their existing clubhouse, and loop right through. And so it's intended to be a contiguous plan, and we can certainly bring that overview to council as a screenshot if they would feel that would be beneficial to the consideration when it goes to council.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My questions have now been answered to my satisfaction, and I would like to make the motion to accept the staff recommendation.
Thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor. On the motion, Mayor Martin.
Thank you. I'm supportive of the motion, and I will be supporting it. I have a couple questions in regards to the plan. First of all, I'm excited that we have Olympic View. I appreciate that we're going to be seeing a development moving forward. I think it's critical for the success of Colwood long-term economically for this project to continue moving forward. So I think it's great. I actually want to mirror Councillor Day's comments in regards to the lighting. I agree that I think we should be looking at having lighting that is consistent throughout the city and not consistent by development. I would actually prefer that Royal Bay was consistent with the rest of the city. But there was also another comment that this development is going to be shared between Colwood and Langford. And I understand that we're going to want to make sure that that development looks consistent. But I think using lighting could be a very clear indicator of when you are in Colwood and when you are on Langford in that plan, just because it becomes very confusing. Councillor Logan, you know where you live, it becomes very confusing where that border lies, right? And so it may actually be a very helpful thing for everybody to understand that. As well, I also want to reflect on the lighting issue in regards to exactly what Councillor Day also said about having the materials to replace it and be cost effective and efficient. And I was a little confused with staff comments, so I would like some clarification. If the majority of the city is the Colwood Cyclone LED lighting, and Olympic View used the lower lighting, they're the same internal mechanisms that our public works staffs could replace that using the same stock as the stock that's above.
Brent?
So to answer that, thank you, Chair Logan. So presently our public works staff doesn't replace our lighting fixtures and components within them. I appreciate the request for clarity, and I don't mean to dumb it down too far, but I'm going to take it down to a certain part. You know, a light bulb's a light bulb's a light bulb. And so when we say that replace the ballast, replace the light assembly, what ultimately happens is the housing unit that contains the ballast and the bulb is opened by that contract provider, and the ballast and the bulb is changed. It's that ballast and bulb that we're looking to have uniform as one type. And it's the case around that can change. And so I'm not trying to take away the argument of a common light in that answer. It's just that if we're looking at the meat, the guts of the light, and our ability to maintain and repair that, that's what we're looking at to be consistent, to allow council the flexibility of perhaps changing the look if that's what they wish.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So in regards to that, I will also look for guidance from staff in regards to offering an amendment that we continue on with the city standard or something similar in scope to that. So how would I propose that within as an amendment in regards to the motion in front of us?
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but if I may, through the chair.
Yes, please do, Brent.
One of the things that we've uncovered in this review is that we have multiple standards. One of the things that Royal Bay did do, and not to compare everything to Royal Bay, was they set a standard when in fact we've got 5 alternate standards being used in the city. And I don't mean a standard for private versus public. I mean that we've had a period of time, 5, 7 years, maybe 10 years, where we haven't applied one singular standard. So when Royal Bay came along, they did pick a standard that was included in the zone consideration. And so to seek clarity, and unfortunately, I don't have the words for how we'd amend that. I can work on it with you. It would be which standard we'd like to see. All our lights are held to the downcast intent. We're trying to get the ballast, the meat and potatoes of that light uniform. And so if we were going to take on a new standard, we could mirror that in Royal Bay, which is probably our most prolific light installed in the last several years. Or we could look to another recent example, which would be that lighting fixture was installed in front of Brooks School, for example. But I would ask for that degree of specificity. We've been looked towards making sure the guts, the lighting assembly is being matching in those installations.
Brent, what's in the bylaw? It's the Colwood Cyclone LED lighting that is pictured before us right now?
So coming through, and I'm going to again reference the report. And sorry if you hear me flipping pages. So the light that's been most commonly applied as of recently, which is the one that was used in Brooks School, is on page 213 of your agenda. And it's that Colwood Cyclone LED, which, as Aaron indicated in his presentation, is fully 100% downcast. And the proposed Lumca has just a slightly different lighting pattern to the ground. Jeff, please feel free to cut in where you feel it's important for the lighting discussion.
Yes, happy to do that. So one thing in the past, past councils have asked for is some spare supplies for that occurrence where it does happen, where something is faulty or burns out. So they do have something on hand to replace it with. And I think that's something that Olympic View is happy to do, to give some assurances. Again, my understanding from Langford, if you don't mind me kind of comparing to Langford, they had specified cyclone lights in the past and found the quality was not quite up to par. And so they actually prefer the Lumca LEDs. And that's one of the reasons that we went with these, is on their recommendation. Again, trying to get a seamless look between both sides of the development, between Langford and Colwood. Again, that's one of the differentiators, is to try and have a single look to this development, both from a lighting standpoint, a road standpoint, pedestrian connectivity. We want it to be consistent. So that is one of the main thrusts of why we're trying to propose a different light standard. And to get back to some of the other concerns about how will you know if you're in Langford or Colwood, there's a whole separate package that Paul de Grief has prepared for trailheads, signage, and wayfinding. And we've been working with Colwood staff on that one to make sure that the Colwood branding in color is on these signs. So there will be definite placemakers of when you are entering and leaving Colwood.
So, and through the chair, just to more address Mayor Martin's question, I'm looking at page 224, which is the option alternatives, and I could flip back and forth. Allowing council to move forward with the consideration, we could receive as a staff level that the lighting be excluded, as Mayor Martin implied. And we could return, administration could return with the specific light options. We could show you everything that's been installed as of recently and bring that forward when this returns to council. So if committee would like to recommend that we flush this out farther, we can certainly do that at that time. So if we were going to move forward and address the specificity of the lighting component of the options and alternative, and I'm just flipping back and forth, actually. I'm gonna start on 219. Option 1, that the proposed road design standards, and you notice it says including furniture, lighting, and boulevard landscaping. Committee may opt to just strike the word lighting from that component and then provide a separate direction for staff to return with more information if that's how it sees fit.
Okay. Thank you for that, Brent. Mayor Martin, did you have anything else to add? Are you okay for now?
Yeah, no, I'm okay for now. So I certainly do not wish to delay this project. So I'm not looking to, I think we need to make a decision tonight. So I'm not attempting to do that. I don't necessarily agree with the lighting thing, just because, I mean, it's part of the issue that we've been addressing just about wayfinding in general, that we've been trying to learn and be consistent throughout the entire city. So I would love for that to be a future discussion item, and I will, and I think staff can easily bring that forward to us as this project moves forward. So yes, I'm content right now. Thank you.
Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Councillor Logan.
Sorry,
yeah,
before you
now?
start, Stuart, sorry, I just saw Robert's hand go up. I don't know if you wanted to jump in now, Robert, or after Stuart's finished.
Thank you, Chair Logan. I just wanted to suggest as a companion motion, once council completes this discussion and provides administration with direction, I think what I'm hearing from this conversation is there may be value in placing on council's either near-term or long-term agenda direction for staff to return with a discussion broadly about wayfinding and how our signage, how our branding, how our fixtures, and how our furniture affect that. And through that, seek council's direction on whether or not you would like a uniform look throughout our community, or whether there are differentiated parts of our community where you'd like to see the signage, the fixtures, the furniture, the street lighting different. Should Colwood Corners be different from the Lagoon or from Olympic View or from Royal Bay? And so I would recommend to council at the end of this conversation, a companion motion to direct administration to return with the broader conversation about wayfinding fixtures and furniture to help folks understand where they're at and whether leaving one area and entering another.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that, Stuart.
It's okay. I'm a supporter of what's going on here. I like the idea. I heard the developers, consultants talk about trying to be consistent with Langford. That was one of my questions. So the road standards we're looking at will be consistent within Langford and within Colwood. Is that correct?
Jeff? Or
yes,
Stuart?
that is correct. We have vetted these designs both through Colwood and Langford staff, and we had quite a bit of feedback from the Colwood staff and made changes, and then again put them through Langford. They are in acceptance of what we're proposing here, so we feel confident that I think we've kind of addressed all the concerns, and we want to move forward with this.
Okay,
So it will
thank
be
you for that.
consistent.
And I heard, you know, I'm very happy with letting them choose distinctive poles that sort of brand this as the Olympic View area, and their offer of putting some spare parts and spare poles in the public works yard so that when there are problems that we can deal with them. I think you know, and Robert's suggestion of a wayfinding study is okay, but I think we'll find that over time lights evolve. You know, they get more efficient, they get different. One guy who used to make great lights maybe goes out of business or doesn't have the same quality control or for whatever. You know, to think that all of Colwood is forever going to be one kind of light, I doubt it. So if this works at Olympic View and makes them happy, I would support their preferred lighting standards. So I'm okay with that. I do have a number of questions. So the collector roads, will there be driveways off the collector roads at all?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
so Stuart, yeah, the multifamilies will be coming right from the collector roads. They shouldn't bleed park, sorry, that was the wrong use of term. They shouldn't extend parking from the on-site ratio onto the off-site works, but there is intended to be driveways off of the collector roads, correct?
And driveways for single families?
Single family should largely be not located off the collector roadway. They should be off of individual routes. Peter or Jeff, you are welcome to contradict me if that's appropriate.
Within the Colwood lands, that's consistent. Yep. There's off the top of my head, I don't know if there are any single family accesses off the collector roads.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Irrigation systems that are proposed, are these anticipated to be permanent, or are these a couple of year systems for the grow in and then they wouldn't be required anymore?
Paul, do you want to head that one off if you're available? Sorry, we may have lost Paul, and through the chair, I'll attempt to answer that one, but please, Jeff or Paul, when you come back, advise. The irrigation systems are intended for the establishment periods, but the boulevards are ultimately, and I know it was an interesting response from Mr. DeGrief about that sort of look and feel, but they're intended to be as naturalized as possible. So where irrigation is minor necessary for the establishment period, that's part of why they've entered a 2-year maintenance contract or maintenance offering with the city, but we would always intend to turn those off as best as possible, Councillor Parkinson, after the trees were deemed established and the boulevard was starting to root itself into the natural look that we're going for. One of the key factors, though, of this boulevard area is this is and Paul roughly outlined it, this look is something that is intended to be quite natural and is to mimic very similar to the existing driveway to the Olympic View lands. So I would encourage all members of committee before this matter gets to council to drive that driveway and look at how that naturalized going. You can see how the rock is integrating with the tree seedlings that come forward. And then there's whole sections where long grass segments are in place. So the irrigation is meant to be minor and just to establish growing.
Next question, curbs. Within all these different road cross sections, there'll be a requirement for several different brands of curbs, types of curbs. Probably not consistent with the current bylaw. will they have the flexibility to use the correct curbs in the correct places, or would they be forced into following a bylaw because we haven't given them an exception tonight?
And Jeff, you're welcome to again cut in. And through the chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Parkinson. You're very right. Through the arterial sort of collector road network, we're looking at a non-mountable curb section, obviously having drops to allow accessibility to the BC Transit as per their regulations and intersections. Through the residential lands, one of the biggest factors is the intrusion of wheels onto the curb where you do a mountable variety. So the developer and staff have spent quite a bit of time going back and forth. They are intended to be all of the sort of curbs. There will be sections of flat curb in here where we've got straight sections of roadway because staff have spoken about the vehicle's tendency to cut those curbs. There will be mountable curb sections where the single family driveways aren't fixed at this point in time, and non-mountable for the sort of collectors controlling those points of access to the points of access that are intended to allow for that universal accessibility.
Okay, so as long as they've got the flexibility to do what's right, I'm happy.
We do believe
I
so.
don't want to see incorrect curbs used because it was the city standard. Now, if Jeff is gone, this might be a hard one, and maybe it's something to follow up. But they're the horizontal and vertical curves that they're proposing with the speed limits. Are those all consistent with TAC standards?
Jeff is still here. Yes, they're all consistent. We've given Colwood staff a table of all the various curve data from TAC, and so those are all consistent.
Great. Okay. And then if maybe sometime before this comes back again, and hopefully with a little bit of leeway, if somebody could point me to an example of a collector road that's only 6.6 meters wide, and again, the cul-de-sac, I think you got your K values down to 2s on those. Those are two areas that I wonder if they're not being squeezed a little too hard. I'd like to see some examples. I guess my fear on the collector road is if if there's a garbage truck slowly going up and stopping and collecting, it may be hard for cars to pass, and there might be some issues with that, or a moving van parked to unload stuff. A narrow road that tight may cause some issues. So I'd like to go look at one if I could. So if you think of any examples, I'd much appreciate it.
Sure, we can try and find some examples for you, but just to be clear, Councillor Parkinson, the 6.6 travel length or travel width is asphalt. It doesn't include the gutter pan. So gutter to gutter would be 7.2 meters. So there's a little bit of extra breathing room there. We did run that by BC Transit, and they're happy with that width. Again, one of the main thrusts of this was A, traffic calming, but also B, stormwater management to try and reduce hard surfaces.
If I can interject as well, Councillor Parkinson, through the chair, one of the things we've really tried to work with Jeff and the team at WSP on is this one thing to sign a road as the reduced speed, but it's another to actually have that road designed to actually mimic the speed that it's being designed for. And so when we started looking at the 3.3, BC Transit became one of the primary objectives, and they've recently done a fair bit of learning in other areas of the town. And so as Jeff implied, they were quite happy with 3.3.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of it's been covered. The 2 meters that we're losing, I take it that's primarily in the width of the traveled portion of the road. Is that my understanding?
Confirmed, but it's segments from each, Councillor Jensen. If you shave 0.2 from the road and then 0.1 from a boulevard and then 0.1 from the back, 20 meters is considered a very, very generous right away in today's standards.
Yeah. Thank you. And are these, so I heard they're going to be doing some maintenance for a couple of years. Are these roads stratified? Or are these community roads when this development's finished?
These roads, the multifamily sites would be intended to be private driveways, so they would be under strata law, but all the rest of the roads, excepting some of the details around the commercial area, are intended to be public. I don't want to imply that all of the road segments are are hammered through as we've got a plan for how they're going to be realized. So we can look at connectivity, trail connectivity, cycling connectivity, transit connectivity, but the detailed design elements aren't fully through on it yet.
Thank you. And I am heartened to hear that a lot of thoughts being placed on the maintenance level because of the concerns. I have concerns about sort of what's been delivered down at Royal Bay and how onerous that is on our staff cadre. I see lots of material about what the gutters and swales and rain gardens. I see nary a word about a tree. Is that a different discussion as far as landscape design, or is that not part of this discussion, or what?
It all forms part of the standard. The look and feel for every single component and the intention to plant trees forms part of every single intent. One of the key factors that Paul can speak to is that naturalized element. And Paul, are you with us?
I am, yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I can say that trees are indeed part of the planting intent. And as we're having this conversation and council members are asking great questions, I'm actually kind of saddened by the fact that you haven't been part of the process that's gone on behind the scenes with staff and with our design team. It's been a really rewarding process for all of us. I think we've learned from each other and pushed this thing forward. And part of that was a discussion with your public works group, who had some great comments on, questions around the gravel mulch and the trees and that sort of thing. So the intent here is to use mostly native trees. So we've actually got Gary Oak, Douglas fir, and even trees like grand fir and Pacific dogwood going in. And those trees we would expect to have an initial relatively high maintenance period, but then after a few years of establishment, we would expect the maintenance level to drop off significantly. And that was well understood and appreciated by public works staff as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'm getting close here. Did I see right? There's really no parking on the collector road. I made a note of that. And did I hear right? That's done with intention then, Brent?
Yes, it is. It is done with intention. One of the things that we've recently talked about, and I'm not trying to bring up, excuse me, past meetings in today's, but is that on-site ratio is meeting the on-site needs and the off-site ratio is providing that benefit. So there will be parking when we get up and near the commercial area, which will be accessible from that arterial collector roadway. But on the whole, we are not intending on complementing the on-street standard for street parking on the collector. Where you'll see it developed in more of a Royal Bay sort of style, just to bring that comparative around, would be in the local cul-de-sacs that serve the local community, that serve those single family intent.
Okay, sounds great. And last but not least, near and dear to my heart, I see lots of wording about furniture. Does the word furniture include garbage receptacles?
So one of the things that and I thank Robert Earl for raising the item, because that still stands as a direction that the committee may choose to provide. Sandra, our communications officer, has been actively engaged in these plans. And so yes, Councillor Jensen, not only does it include informational sign for welcome you to Olympic View, which the developers agreed will have a portion, not large, but a portion of our brand on it. Benches will also have a portion of branding and wayfinding elements. Garbage cans are something that's being talked about, but please, I do not have a map to show you where they all are, but we're looking to complement them with bus stops and that sort of factor as well.
I just want to hear there's going to be a garbage can or two at the necessary locations.
God knows I don't want to relive that drama.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Motion on the floor, Councillor Day, and then I'll look to call the question. Councillor Day?
Sorry, it's my turn to forget to unmute. I'd like to move an amendment to remove the word lighting here tonight so that we can deal with that when we have the report that Brent and others were speaking about coming back. I'd rather not say what the lighting should be tonight, but get the report and then make the decision on what the lighting should be. So that's why I'm proposing that amendment.
Thank you. So discussion on the amendment, Councillor Parkinson?
Yeah, I'll be voting against this amendment. I think that it's not an insurmountable issue to have different lights. And I think, to me, I would suggest that the developers are probably perfectly justified to try to match the look of this development in Colwood and in Langford. And we can leave the delineation to things like the trail markers and other things to so people know they're in Colwood or in Langford. And let's let him create the look he wants for his development. So I'm happy with the lights as proposed, especially hearing there are going to be some spares provided. So I'll be voting against the motion.
Great, thank you. Not seeing any more hands. So on the amendment to remove the word lighting, those opposed, please raise your virtual hands. Councillor Jansen, Councillor Parkinson, Councillor Kobayashi, and I too will be opposing the amendment. So the amendment fails. On the main motion before us, I will call the question. Any opposed, please raise your virtual hand. I see one, Councillor Day is opposed, so the motion passes. With that, our next meeting, the committee of the whole scheduled for Monday, June the 1st, and I will just look for a motion to adjourn.
Just before we do that, could I just ask that when we see this again next, could we get a map showing where the connections are? What I'm missing with this is an overview of where the trail goes and what it connects to. And I just would like to see that when we next look at this issue.
Through the chair, we can certainly bring you some of that. However, just to augment that as we're speaking now, Aaron has been texting me, and if you look at Appendix A, which starts at about page 231, it looks like, you can actually see a bit of an overview on where the municipal borders are and the sort of loop for that main collector road. So what we'll do is we'll bring that back in bigger format so you can see it more specifically and start to address some of your more specific comments.
Yeah, no, I did look at that, but I'm sorry, it doesn't show connections to other developments in the area. And there's a lot of connection between Pelican and Latoria Creek Park and numerous other areas when we were looking at trail connections quite a few years ago that were anticipated.
Sorry, Cynthia, I think we could probably take this offline and maybe staff can provide an overall plan, but
okay.
We don't get too much in the weeds here. But so I do have Councillor Jansen who moved adjournment, and any opposed? Not seeing any opposed, so the meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.